Krefeld, 1984. One night, a father awakens his 6-year-old son Mark because they need to flee their now dangerous home. While the man hurries the older son, Thomas, Mark sees a frog statuette that stood on the shelf come to life. The father and sons drive into the night. Suddenly, the boy's mother Petra appears, begging the father not to take the sons as no one is pursuing him. He drives around her and races to the cemetery. 10 years pass. Mark works at the Living Sound store he opened with his brother and attends school, where he has a bad reputation as his brother was once expelled for aggressive behavior. Besides the boys, a lame kid named Memo works in the store, whom Thomas values for his loyalty. On his younger brother's birthday, Thomas gives him the Chronicle, an ancient book passed down in their family from generation to generation, telling of a parallel world called the Black Tower, full of terrifying creatures serving the Griffin, who wants to subjugate the world of humans. Only the Zimmerman family men can stand against the Griffon and save everyone from his invasion. Mark begins reading, considering it all fantasy, but the descriptions are too realistic, and the map looks genuine. Disturbed by the bloodthirsty drawings, Mark suddenly finds himself in unknown terrain at the base of a huge tower, and immediately a terrible horned creature confronts him. Mark runs and falls into a pit, and as the monster swings an axe at him, the boy screams in fear and finds himself back in his bed. The next day, Mark meets a new student at school, Rebecca, who classmates immediately inform about Mark's family troubles. His brother Thomas was in an asylum for hitting a teacher, and Mark attends psychotherapy sessions, trying to forget the events of one terrible night. But the girl isn't scared off, happily accepting Mark's invitation to the rooftop of the store, which is set up as a picnic area. In the evening, Mark finds Thomas at home, which is rare. Everything goes well until Petra starts a conversation about the asylum she put him in. Then Thomas invites his brother to look at evidence and drives him to the cemetery. They climb to the attic of the church where their ancestors had equipped a shelter. Thomas shows the father's belongings, missing a plumb bob. Here, Mark cuts his finger. His blood hits an inconspicuous peg, and a secret compartment in the floor opens, where the brothers find the tool the Zimmermans can use to kill the Griffin. But the moment Mark takes it in his hands, stone statues at the cemetery come to life, one appearing on the roof, blocking the brothers' way down. Nonetheless, they descend, but a stone devil jumps right in front of their car. A stone angel intervenes to protect the boys, and while the two statues fight, the brothers hide in the church. Waiting out the battle, Mark falls asleep, and in the morning, doesn't find Thomas next to him, but the hood of his car is covered in stone debris. Mark thanks the angel for help and drives to look for his brother. Opening the Chronicle, he hears voices advising to look for Thomas in the Black Tower. Mark goes to Dr. Peters, and it turns out that Becky is the daughter of his psychotherapist. Mark drives to the store, but his brother isn't there either. The boy opens the Chronicles and finds information about a portal located in the church. But then he gets scared by an unknown insect and ends up in a dense forest. Meanwhile, Memo, seeing that the brothers aren't in the store, calls their mother Petra, who immediately rushes to the police and reports the children missing. Mark finds Thomas, who rejoices that his brother has finally seen the truth, but learning that he simply teleported here, he concludes that his brother is a wanderer between worlds. In the morning, Thomas wakes his brother because nearby appear slave hunters. The boys run, but Thomas is wounded and captured, while Mark teleports to the store, terrifying Becky and Memo. Friends ask him to tell them everything, and he finally agrees. Meanwhile, in the Black Tower, one of the horned creatures reports to the master that they caught the Wanderer's brother, and he concludes that it's time for the return. Friends predictably don't believe Mark, and he leads them to the church, but there's no attic above. Becky considers this a cruel joke, as it was dangerous for Memo with his leg to climb up there. Mark gets angry, and the girl, offended, leaves. In rage, Mark hits the stone base of the statue, and these blows resonate in the caves of the Black Tower. At night, Mark goes to Memo because he needs help searching for his brother, and although he considers the boy crazy, he goes with him to the portal in the church. The boys follow the instructions from the book and find a door with signs in the basement. Mark performs the necessary manipulations, and the door opens. Astonished, Memo goes there and immediately notices that his vision has become normal, and his leg no longer hurts. And while the boy rejoices, the passage closes. Memo asks to remember how Mark returned home last time, and he shows how he closed his eyes, thought, and disappears, leaving Memo alone in a strange world. Memo didn't appreciate such a joke. Opening his eyes, Mark is horrified and tries to return for Memo, but it doesn't work. Then Petra enters, sees the chronicles, locks her son in the room, and he falls into a rage, causing the walls of the Black Tower to crumble. Petra calls the doctor and he asks to release the son. Mark rushes to the church but only finds a note on a piece of wood that Memo is nearby. The boy returns to the store and, taking the necessary items, goes to Becky, where he tells her that Memo stayed in the Black Tower. He leaves her the chronicles and a note asking her to take the book to Petra if they don't return. He goes to the world of the Black Tower and tries to find a friend, while Becky reads the chronicles and ponders the boy's mental health. Mark emerges from the forest and, setting up a sound system on a cliff, plays Memo's favorite music. Meanwhile, the slave hunters capture a village where they seek a man with a loud voice. One of the boys, wishing to save his family, volunteers to become one, and they take him away, while a group of horned creatures goes to the strange sounds in the hills. At the same time, Becky shares Mark's secret with classmates and suggests conducting an experiment to animate a plant from the book. The volunteer is brought to the cave and seated in a stone chair. Now the griffin, wanting to speak, inserts its claw into the boy's back, and he voices its thoughts. While Mark is discovered by horned creatures, the boy runs from them when an unfamiliar man, completely wrapped in rags, covers the boy with smelly fish and hides him in a forest den. Meanwhile, Becky performs the ritual, dripping water on the flower, but young people vainly wait for some manifestations of magic. The flower remains dry. Becky suggests a last attempt at the portal, not noticing how a classmate puts the flower in a glass of water. At the same time, the horned creatures leave, and the stranger helping Mark removes the rag from his face, revealing himself to be Memo. But he's been in this world for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Then the boys see a caravan of slaves, and in one of them, they recognize Thomas. But while they can't help him, they themselves are noticed. The boys run from the pursuers and end up on a high cliff with no way out. On Earth, Mark's classmates come to the church and perform everything prescribed, but the door doesn't open. Then Mark grabs Memo, jumps off the cliff, and teleports to his room. Petra hears a noise in her son's room, runs there, and sees Mark and Memo, who now needs glasses again. Mark calls Becky and asks her to bring the chronicles, while a flower blooms on her desk, from which something terrible emerges. The next day, the boys begin developing a plan to save Thomas, especially since Memo now knows a lot about the world of the Black Tower. He built a hut on the shore of a lake where the caravans of slaves stop, following which one can find the place of the boys' confinement. Meanwhile, the griffin is reported that the wanderer between worlds has escaped, and it destroys its close. And Becky, waking up, finds a blooming flower, miraculously avoiding contact with the creature, and gives the chronicles to her father because she now considers Mark sick. In school, she tells the boy about this, and he experiences another fit of rage. Becky's father, having read the chronicles, goes to Petra and admits that he underestimated her son's illness. The woman decides to hospitalize Mark despite the doctor's protests. Later, the woman detains her son near the house when an ambulance arrives, and paramedics grab the boy, but he resists and runs across the roof to the church, where Memo has long been waiting, but the paramedics come there too. The boys fend them off when suddenly a hooded man comes and scatters the medics, beating one to death. The boys run to the door, while Petra waiting outside sees a bloodied Mark coming out of the church. At that time, Memo leads his friend to his hut by the lake. Meanwhile, the father informs Becky about Mark's deed and forbids her from leaving the house. He himself goes to the crime scene and confirms Mark's capacity for crime. Becky enters her room, turns on music, and lies down on the floor. At the same time, a downpour suddenly starts in the Black Tower, and the alarmed Memo shows the scorpions hatching from the flowers upon contact with water. The boys run away. On Earth, Becky is attacked by a similar scorpion that enters her mouth. She manages to pull it out with tongs and destroy it by sprinkling salt. The boys also manage to escape by climbing onto a rock. Morning comes, the scorpions dry out right before their eyes, and Becky rushes to look for the chronicles because she now believes the boy. She takes the book and hurries to Petra. At the same time, the boys reach a lake in the mountains. On Earth, Becky's father comes home, takes off his bloodied clothes and burns them in the yard because it was he who was in Mark's guise in the church and killed the medic. Meanwhile, a faceless wizard arrives at the Griffin, reporting that he did everything to prevent the boy from returning to the human world. And Mark, at this time, admires Memo's cabin and is surprised by the changes in his friend. From the cabin, one can monitor the paths, and the caravan will not pass by unnoticed. But just in case, the boys set up signal cans. Becky comes to Petra, where a detective arrives, who also notes the oddity of what is happening. The girl tells everything she managed to find out about the Zimmerman family, and only then notices that she forgot her backpack with the Chronicle in the classmate's car. Mark and Memo spend the evening by the fire, developing a plan. Mark can go to the mines, find Thomas, and teleport home with him. Memo is ready to walk to the portal that Mark will open, but the boy needs to train in teleportation. At this time, the wizard reports the plans of the boys who stopped at the lake. The Griffin orders their capture and reminds that he does not need complications in the human world yet. In the morning, Mark wakes up feeling someone's presence, and going to the shore, hears the screams of a fish, which Memo catches, and guts. Mark remembers how and where he teleported, and begins training. At the same time, a messenger from the Black Tower comes to Dr. Peters's house, telling about Mark's appearance. The doctor is proud of himself because it was he who prepared the boy, invoking the necessary rage in him and cutting off his way to the world of people. After seeing off the guest, the doctor goes to Becky's room and discovers that she has disappeared. He gathers dust in her room and, tasting it, learns about everything she did during the day. Then he goes to a youth party where the girl went to get her backpack back. Meanwhile, Memo expresses the thought that fear is not necessary for teleportation, and Mark remembers the kiss with Becky and teleports to the town. He immediately returns, but it turns out that he was gone for 2 days. The boy finds out that strong emotion and a vision of the place to which one must move are needed for teleportation. At this time, Becky finds her water-soaked backpack in the kitchen, and opening the book, sees a bloomed flower. The girl realizes the threat looming over those present, takes a pack of salt, and goes to track down the monster. In the other world, Mark again hears someone's footsteps and sees his father, who accuses him of his own death. Memo brings him to his senses, but Mark is sure that someone is getting into his head. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters comes to the party when one of the girls is attacked by the monster. Becky rushes for help when her father stops her and, using hypnosis, orders her to leave. Petra and the detective sitting in the hall suddenly see young people flying out of the crowd, then screams are heard, and everyone runs away. And in the middle of the hall remains an incomprehensible creature, resembling a many-legged scorpion. The detective pulls out a gun, but the monster attacks him, knocking the weapon out. And then Petra picks up the pistol and saves the detective. Then the doctor enters the hall and the killed millipede turns into a bear. In the morning, Mark wakes up again from the scream of the fish and, in irritation, argues with Memo. But his box of nails, which he uses to remove anger, turns out to be empty. He runs out to the shore, where Memo teases him and throws the nails into the lake. Then he reminds him of his father, saying that he is to blame for his death. In a rage, Mark hits Memo, thereby collapsing the walls of the Black Tower. The Griffin sends hunters after him. Meanwhile, Memo collects firewood and, returning to the lake, sees Mark hitting another Memo. He touches the body and it suddenly scatters, but the traces in the sand betray the direction of his run. Memo throws a stick and stuns the faceless wizard who disguised himself as Memo. The boys tie him to a cot, and he tries to deceive the guys, alternately taking the forms of their fathers. Only under the threat of fire does the wizard admit that he is Mamit, a creature capable of recreating thought and showing what people want to see. He did everything at the behest of the Griffin because he feeds on Mark's hatred. At that moment, the signal of the caravan's arrival sounds. And in the town they investigate an accident, although no one can understand how the circus bear got out of the cage. The detective asks Petra for a conversation and tells her that after her husband's self-immolation, they did not find a trace of his body. He was taking antidepressants, thanks to which he was able to see the true face of the prosecutor. And it was not human. The case was slowed down, and today they both saw a monster, not a bear. So, they need to look for the chronicles. At the same time, the doctor brings Becky to her senses and she remembers the story about the Mammoths who served the Griffin, to which her father reacts very aggressively, which makes the girl suspicious. The doctor locks her up. Mark and Memo follow the trail of the Horned squad to the mine, where people work. The commander of the Horned reports to the mine overseer about the failure of their mission and receives an order to process the tunnels with tar mud. Mark, to find Thomas, turns on the music system. The brother raises his hand, but the horned ones immediately take him into the mine. Mark suggests waiting for darkness. At night the boys say goodbye, and Mark teleports while Memo distracts the guard. The boy finds his brother, but it turns out that the tar prevents teleportation. Thomas admits that he was used as bait. They even left him a plumb line. This means that the Griffin is ready to attack the human world, using Mark's power. At the same time, Memo runs to the portal, leading away the horned squad, while the brothers argue about who will fight the Griffin. Mark shows his superiority by breaking through the cave wall with a plumb line. The brothers run away, and Memo falls into an ambush and loses fingers on his hand. Mark and Thomas catch up with the squad and, having killed one of the horned ones, find the injured Memo. Learning about the escape of the Wanderer, the Griffin emerges from his hiding place and flies in the footsteps of the people who at that time are driving to the portal in a captured cart. But at the very door, Thomas suddenly demands that Mark give him the plumb line. He refuses, and Thomas forcibly takes it, and then the Griffin appears above them. At this time, the detective and Petra take Becky out of the house, ignoring her father's protests. Mark comes to his senses and hears Thomas's voice from the mist, picks up the plumb line he threw, and realizes that his brother was captured by the Griffin. At that time, Petra, the detective, and Becky are trying to open the portal. And the Griffin calls Mark to battle, fueling his hatred. But the boy suddenly remembers his father's advice, calms down, and refuses to fight while Petra opens the portal. Becky manages to pick up Memo when Mark sees the enraged Griffin and wounds him with a plumb line, forcing him to drop Thomas. The boys drag him into the passage and close the door in the monster's face. Meanwhile, a Mimit in the guise of Dr. Peters kills another Mimit who will now work on Earth instead of him. It turns out that Dr. Peters is a Mimit in human form, and in the church, he killed the medic while in the guise of Mark so that the police would look for the boy and he could not return to the world of people. Sometime later, Petra comes to her sons in the hospital and asks for forgiveness for mistrust, but now she has seen everything herself and, together with the detective, is ready to support them. Mark thanks Memo for everything, goes to Becky, and, having kissed her, teleports her to the lakeshore, while new horned ones are born from stones in the cave. An entertaining adventure series, quite decently filmed by German cinematographers. And judging by the finale, there will be a second season too. In February 1959, a group of 9 Soviet tourists went missing in the mountains of the northern Urals. 2 weeks later, their bodies were found at the base of Mount Oturton, which in the language of the indigenous people meant the Mountain of the Dead. The place was named after the leader of the expedition, the Dyatlov Pass. Many years later, American student Holly King became so interested in this case that she decided to gather a new group and go to this mysterious place. The catalyst was a film about an expedition by American scientists who tried to solve the mystery of the Dyatlov group's death but achieved no success. Holly's professor suggested she take up this case for her psychology project, and she invited her friend Jensen to work on it as a film director. They applied for and won a grant. The professor mentioned that she first learned about these events from a novella by Soviet journalist Yarovoy, who soon died in a car accident after the book's release. Jensen suspected that this was how the authorities tried to cover up something terrible. And although people now know a lot about the events of those years, the complete picture remains a mystery. The most common explanation is hypothermic dementia. Although this can happen to those exposed to freezing, in this case, all 9 experienced tourists started undressing at the same time, which is simply impossible. Another frequent explanation is an avalanche. But if they heard the avalanche, why did they sit near the camp for 3 hours without shoes? So there are many answers to this question, one of which involves the secrets of the Russian military, making it seem that the truth will never be known. The first stage of the journey is a flight from Oregon to Chelyabinsk, from where the group will head to the Mountain of the Dead, named by the Mansi people due to a series of unexplained deaths and mysterious disappearances. So the expedition included sound engineer Denise, climber Andy, president of the Northwest Pathfinders Association, who has conquered all the steep peaks in the USA, and his friend Hauser, who spent a whole year conquering the Himalayas. After gathering the group, the guys began to prepare, buying rations, studying maps, and training in the mountains. On January 25th, the team set off. Sometime later, news broke across all U.S. TV channels about the disappearance of 5 Oregon students in the Ural Mountains. Rescuers managed to find their belongings, tents, backpacks, and other equipment. A Russian TV correspondent reported details about the more than strange disappearance of the group of American documentarians, although experts are constructing their versions of the reasons for the disappearance. In winter, the temperature here can drop to -50 degrees, with strong, piercing winds, whose direction constantly changes. This means that if a person walks against the wind and thinks they are walking straight, they might actually be walking in circles. There are speculations about the intervention of some extraterrestrial devices, which many witnesses saw in these places, or even about the appearance of the Yeti. The Mansi elders recall rumbling and fiery balls over these mountains on the days when the Dyatlov group disappeared. They consider these places a portal to the other world. The students wanted to repeat the infamous Dyatlov expedition, and it seems they succeeded. Rescuers managed to find a camera that captured the last days of the documentarians' lives. A group of hackers posted frames on their portal, showing Holly talking about the darkness that followed her from the open door, while Jensen calms the girl, although she is sure they will not get out of this place. The action shifts to a month earlier, when lively and cheerful students are traveling to the Urals. On the train, they are having fun, hoping for success and worldwide fame. Andy is proud of his acquisition, a phone with GPS, which will help them navigate the mountains, while Holly conducts tests to find out people's desire to hike. Soon the group arrives in the town of Evdel, where they plan to interview the only surviving member of the Dyatlov expedition, who left the route due to illness, but now he is held in a psychiatric hospital. However, doctors do not allow the Americans inside, and they only manage to see the old man showing them a note saying, "Leave." In the evening, the group goes to a local bar. The bartender pours them local moonshine and says that the Dyatlov group stopped here in 1959 and drank the same thing as the Americans. There, they meet Sergei, who speaks English and drives them to the village of Visa, the last point before heading out on the road. The man tells them that his aunt, an English teacher, participated in the search for the Dyatlov group. She claims that in 1959, not 9 but 11 bodies were found near the Mountain of the Dead. Next to the last 2, which looked very different from the others, lay some unknown device. But none of this was mentioned in the reports. After the conversation, the guys set off on foot. At night they stop and set up camp, as the weather begins to change. Hauser prepares a camp dinner, and the guys have fun joking with each other. At night, people see strange lights in the sky and recall reports of orange flashes over the Dyatlov camp, but they decide they still won't be able to solve this mystery and go to sleep. However, in the morning, they notice numerous barefoot tracks of unusual sizes around the tents, resembling human ones. The main thing is that the tracks have no beginning or end, as if some creatures did not come to the camp but flew in. Nevertheless, they set off to explore the area. Soon the students find an abandoned meteorological station, around which the same tracks are found, and in the station's booth lies a torn-out human tongue. Denise panics and asks Holly to leave, but Jensen tells her about a pass in China where animals and birds crash into cliffs and people go insane and die. It is said to happen because of the sound of the wind. Holly admits that she had a similar dream. Mountains, snow, and some door with darkness behind it. And then she heard about the Dyatlov Pass and realized that she would find out everything here. During their conversation, the camera captures 2 human figures running far in the background. Later they go further and unexpectedly come to the Dyatlov Pass. Once, 9 people set up camp in this very place, had dinner, and went to sleep. But somewhere between 9 and 11 at night, something that the authorities called an unknown irresistible force forced them to leave the tent in such horror that they cut it from the inside and ran into the night, where it was -28 degrees. Holly marks the places where their bodies were found. The first deceased, Rustem Slobodin, Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader and the most experienced tourist. It was probably his idea to leave the tent. Zinaida Kolmogorova was closest to the camp, the only victim who resisted, as her tongue and most of her oral cavity were torn out. Lyudmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov. The cause of death for all was called hypothermia, but Rustem and Nikolai had serious skull injuries, and Lyudmila and Alexander had broken ribs, which was not observed in others. There were no signs of an attack on any of the bodies, no external injuries. Something broke the skulls of 2 men and the ribs of 2 people without leaving even bruises. Moreover, Alexander's body had a high level of radiation. But from where, and why only on him? Georgy Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko, when others ran away, sat by the extinguished fire and froze to death. While Holly is conducting research, Andy is surprised that their group somehow covered 22 kilometers in one day. Everyone's watches, GPS, and even the compass stopped working. Some guys suggest leaving the mountains before it's too late, but Holly persuades them to stay and finish the film. At night, Holly notices that the Geiger counter starts signaling, and together with Jensen, they go up the slope, where they find a high but not deadly level of radiation. Unexpectedly, the students discover the entrance to a bunker, closed with an iron door. Holly wants to open it, although Jensen is categorically against it, as Russian authorities did not build it here for nothing, closing something dangerous in the mountain. However, it turns out that the door is open and just a bit frozen. Holly asks Jensen not to tell the others about the discovery to avoid causing panic among the already scared team. They return to the camp and settle for the night. Around 6 a.m., a huge avalanche roars down the mountains, killing Denise, injuring Andy, and sweeping away the tents and almost all supplies. At first, everyone quarrels, trying to find the culprit of the tragedy, but gradually they realize it was an attempt on their expedition. They help Andy and try to contact the outside world somehow. Holly tells them about the bunker, which enrages Hauser since they are freezing here in the snow, while it might be warm there. The students launch a signal flare and wait for help. After some time, 2 people arrive, claiming they saw the flare, but Andy does not believe them, since they have no backpacks and could not have reached here so quickly. He stays to hold them back while the others are ordered to run. The strangers shoot Andy and wound Hauser. Holly, Jensen, and the wounded Hauser barely manage to get into the bunker. The strangers pursue them, but the students close the door. The Americans turn on the lighting, although it is dim and flickering. Running through the tunnels, they find a laboratory full of various devices and documents, among which are old journals with the names of people who died in the line of duty. There are also details about the famous American experiment with the teleportation of the USS Eldridge. Hauser feels unwell and stays put, as Holly promises to find an exit in return for him. The students continue on alone. Soon, Holly and Jensen find the bodies of soldiers who recently died. One of them is missing a tongue, presumably the one they found earlier at the station. But the other bodies are very old and even skeletonized. The 2 open another door, behind which they sense movement. Suddenly, under the flashlight, they see exactly the same camera they have. Moreover, it has their recordings on it. Jensen recalls the teleportation of the Eldridge, which likely happened to them too. At that time, many soldiers mutated, turning into something incomprehensible. At that moment, they hear Hauser's screams and rush to him, finding their friend being torn apart by 2 humanoid mutants. Noticing the newcomers, the mutants attack them. Resembling skeletons covered in skin, the mutants seem to possess the ability to teleport as they appear out of nowhere in any place. Jensen and Holly leave their friend's body, run out of the bunker, and close the door. To their surprise, the mutants do not chase after them. The survivors turn around, and instead of a snowy field, they see a fossil forming a huge round tunnel. The students realize that this is the path for the mutants' teleportation. Holly throws debris inside and sees that the passage is activated. Looking around, the couple finds drawings on the walls made by the local inhabitants and understands that they discovered this place, built by an ancient civilization once living under these mountains. Such portals can be anything, even weapons scattered around the world, which explains many great mysteries. They do not know where it might take them, to which space or time, but Jensen suggests they need to mentally focus on the place they intend to go. And it will work. The only place that they both clearly imagine is the surroundings of their camp near the bunker entrance. They have no choice but to head into the tunnel. The plot shifts back to 1959, when a Soviet girl from the search team finds their bodies and is very surprised because the rescuers have already found all 9 participants of the expedition. Approaching Soviet soldiers take the bodies to the bunker, while one major picks up the Americans' camera, not understanding what it is. The soldier wants to place the Americans with the other bodies, but the major orders them to be placed in a separate room for examination by a doctor. Undressing the deceased, the soldiers are astonished by the unusual clothing for the 1950s. The naked bodies of Holly and Jensen, now looking like mutant bodies, are hung on hooks in a separate cell. The sergeant places the camera under a light. When everyone leaves, the creatures begin to revive. The man lifts his head and looks at the woman. She directs her gaze at the camera, and an angel wing tattoo is visible on the right side of her neck, the same one Holly had. Despite some inconsistencies, the storyline adheres to most known facts, although the American-Russian creative team skillfully handled the mystified legacy of the USSR. However, the found footage effect combined with acting, special effects, in magnificent locations is good enough to ensure the thriller's watchability. The 1950s. Alice and Jack live in a typical American town. They hang out with friends, have fun, drive around, and love each other. One day, while Alice is getting ready for a party with friends, Jack goes to work with a crowd of other white collars. A female voice narrates that today is the 997th day. All employees are on their way to headquarters. All residents are safe and accounted for. Ladies are wished a good day, and Alice starts her household chores. Then she goes to her dance classes, like all the exemplary wives in town. The instructor, Shelley, reminds them, beauty is in control and grace is in symmetry. After the class, Alice returns home, chats with her neighbor Bonnie, who constantly scolds her children, and goes to take down the dried laundry. A catchy tune constantly plays in Alice's head, and she hums it. Suddenly, she notices another neighbor, Margaret, standing in front of her house, oblivious to her surroundings. Alice starts cooking, but one egg arouses her suspicion. She squeezes it in her hand and the egg turns out to be empty. She crushes the rest, they're all hollow. This activity is interrupted by burnt meat. In the evening, she greets her husband, beautifully dressed, with her hair done, and at a set table. However, her husband decides to start with another, more pleasant activity. The next day, the women relax by the pool. Alice is distracted, the song in her head again causing her concern. Then a visual sequence appears, a circle of women in wigs. Later, Alice approaches a model of the town and mindlessly traces her finger along the streets. And when she leaves the town limits, Bonnie picks her up. It's time for cocktails served by her children. During this time, the men discuss distracting topics. Everything is decent, sunny, and calm. A signal sounds, and Shelley welcomes the new residents. She is happy that the couple can learn from her husband, Frank, who has created something extraordinary, a new world. Margaret interrupts Shelley's speech, saying she and her husband shouldn't be here. Alice's husband hastily leads her away, and the newly appeared Frank apologizes to the guests. The couple is going through a tough time. They're tasked to chase dreams and confront chaos, the main enemy of progress. And they all change the world. The guests echo Frank's words. Everyone here is happy, they are all one family. The man thanks the women for supporting their husbands, they are their support. The fun continues. Alice goes to find Jack, but finds Margaret, who says she has nightmares she can't be here, but Alice's husband quickly pulls the curtain in front of Alice. Alice finds her husband in the house. Jack kisses her, and the couple gets some alone time. But at the brightest moment, Alice sees Frank, who, smiling, watches their lovemaking. Later, the women gather in a shopping center and discuss their perfect lives, and poor Margaret. Alice feels sorry for her neighbor, though Bonnie thinks she brought the trouble on herself. After all, she took her son into the desert by herself. They found her, but without the child. The conversation turns to what the men are doing. No one knows for sure, but it's said that they are making weapons. Bonnie cuts in. That's not their business. Women also do work. They create comfort. At night, Alice has a nightmare, but in the morning, as usual, she sees her husband off to work and starts her household chores. Then she goes on a trip. She is the only one left on the trolley bus and says she just wants to ride. Suddenly, she sees a plane flying towards the mountains, and then it crashes. Alice yells to the driver, but he doesn't understand what she wants. She urges him to help the victims, but he is on his route and cannot deviate. Alice jumps out of the trolleybus and runs towards the mountains. She walks a long way through the desert, then reaches a road and climbs a high mountain, topped by a strange dome. She approaches closer and stops at a mirrored glass. Around her, no one, only her reflection. Alice raises her hands to the glass and loses consciousness. In front of her in the darkness, a circle of dancing women and a male voice calls for order. People must allow themselves to discover what life should be like. The next moment, Alice finds herself on her bed. Coming to the kitchen, she sees Jack preparing dinner. The dishes are in disarray, many groceries spoiled. Alice doesn't understand what's happening, and her husband explains that when he came from work, she was already asleep, and she returned home on the trolley bus. Alice doesn't understand. Did the driver come back for her? But now Jack looks at his wife uncomprehendingly. Alice decides she saw everything in a dream. The next morning, everything goes as usual. Alice sends her husband off and starts cleaning the window glass, but suddenly it seems to move. It presses her against the wall, and the woman is gasping for air. The next moment the phone rings and Alice is completely free. Margaret's voice on the phone urges her to get out of there. After all, she was there and saw it all herself. Alice again sees dancing women, but now it is herself and her friends. And suddenly, instead of her own reflection, Margaret appears, approaching the mirror from the other side and starts banging her head against the surface. Alice screams and comes to. She runs home and sees Margaret on the roof of her house. Turning to Alice, the woman cuts her own throat and falls down. Alice screams in horror, and the arriving employees pick her up and carry away the neighbor's body. In the evening, she tries to explain to Jack, but he doesn't believe his wife. Margaret is in the hospital. She accidentally cut herself while washing windows. Alice feels guilty because her neighbor asked for help. What is happening around them? She asks him to tell her what he is doing on the project, but he cannot talk about it. He asks her to stop the hysterics, which could ruin everything. At night, Alice watches an advertisement for their town and catches herself thinking that it feels like she is floundering in a pool from which it is impossible to swim out. In the morning, she is cooking and suddenly starts wrapping her head with cling film. Alice seems to want to bring herself to her senses, but even the suffocation doesn't help, and she tears off the film. The arriving doctor assures the woman that it's just nervous strain, as Alice witnessed Margaret falling. The woman again insists that her neighbor slit her own throat. The doctor suggests prescribing her pills, but Jack refuses. They will cope. The doctor assures Margaret will soon recover and return home. He leaves, forgetting his briefcase, from which Alice manages to pull out a folder with Margaret's personal file. But all the text is smeared, unreadable. Alice burns the folder. She drinks alcohol and again sees dancing women. Then she finds herself in the bathroom. Jack is unhappy. They will be late, and he brings her a dress. Then he asks Alice to think about having a child, and tonight they have a wonderful evening ahead. The couple arrives at a restaurant where all the town's residents have already gathered. A performance by a glamorous blonde is demonstrated to the audience, and Alice again sees the circle of women and Margaret killing herself. Alice feels ill, but those around her do not notice. Frank gives a speech and invites Jack on stage. He is ready to congratulate the man as he is now entering the senior expert council. He presents Jack with a token of loyalty, a ring. The audience applauds, and Jack performs a dance of gratitude. Alice, unable to watch this, runs to the bathroom. She has a vision of another Jack who has lost his job. A perplexed Bonnie finds her. Alice tries to explain something, but her friend interrupts her. Was Alice at the headquarters? Has she gone mad? She's acting like a spoiled child. Her job is to support her husband, yet she is ruining his career. And now she is behaving like Margaret. Returning to the hall, Alice watches Jack's triumph and restrains herself. In the morning, Jack reminds her that they will have guests in the evening. She needs to express gratitude to Frank. Alice greets the guests with a smile on her face. Everything, as always, is perfect. Her husband meets Frank, while Alice finishes the appetizers. The man enters the kitchen and suddenly starts talking to the hostess. He regrets that Bonnie didn't believe her, but she didn't believe Margaret either. He has been waiting a long time for someone to challenge him. The guests sit down at the table. Alice demonstratively takes the host's seat. Jack, complying, sits next to her. The conversation about nothing begins. Suddenly Alice asks why all the women in the town are from one, at most two states, and they all vacation in the same places. Jack tries to steer the conversation away, but Alice continues. They all met their husbands on a train, under similar circumstances. All their stories are the same because they are told what to remember, but sometimes they suddenly remember the forbidden. Frank is doing something with all of them. The man, smirking, reminds her of her nervous breakdown. Why isn't she getting treated? And why was she at the headquarters? Jack is horrified. She was at the headquarters? Frank continues. She broke the rules. It's the result of psychosis, but she revealed herself to him in his bedroom. Alice is stunned by such a dreadful lie, but Jack believes Frank unconditionally. The woman tries to appeal to the guests' common sense. Where do these products come from? And what's in them? But then Shelley stands up. She will no longer allow her husband to be insulted. The guests leave. Frank is disappointed. He expected something more interesting from her. Jack, having seen everyone out, returns to the house. Alice tries to convey to him that he is the most precious person to her. And she asks to leave here, anywhere, just together. And Jack agrees. They leave the house and get into the car, and then the husband apologizes to his wife, but in the next moment employees pull her out of the car and carry her into the darkness. Alice finds herself on an operating table. Visions with her husband pass by. A doctor in a mask leans over her, in which she recognizes herself. In the next moment, Dr. Alice finishes the operation and goes home, where her unemployed husband meets her. He hasn't prepared dinner because he didn't know what she would want. There's also no hot water. Alice is very tired. She has been standing at the operating table for 30 hours, so she denies her husband intimacy. He sits at the monitor and listens to the advertisement for a new simulation. And again a sunny morning in Paradise Town. Alice returns to her surroundings. An enthusiastic Bonnie meets her and shares the latest news. Alice hugs her children and does not notice her friend's worried look. Her husband goes to work. Alice does household chores, dances, and swims. And she meets her husband. She takes the roast out of the oven while Jack picks a record, humming a song that seems to wake Alice up. Jack walks through the dark city, entering his apartment. Meanwhile, his physical characteristics are narrated. He is absolutely fit to participate in the Victory Project with his friend Alice, and he takes on the responsibility of maintaining his wife's body's vital functions. Alice sees herself in bed, restrained and entangled with wires. Jack cares for her body because he is obliged to exit the simulation each day and work to afford it. The man lies down next to her and hums the song that Alice is hearing now. She realizes he has deprived her of real life, but the man did this to save her from constant work. Frank created this world so they could live as they wanted. He works like a damn soul for this, but she is happy. But what about the others? So they really are hostages. Jack hugs her, but Alice hits him on the head. The next moment, Bonnie finds her. Jack is dead, and she immediately reports it to Frank. Bonnie confesses that she knows everything about the simulation. She chose this life herself because here she can be with her children, who are alive. But other women know nothing. Alice must run, or they will kill her. The woman steps out into the yard, goes to Jack's car, and drives into the desert. Employees chase after her. Cars catch up with her, but Alice, making a maneuver, causes a collision in which a doctor dies. Her pursuers continue the chase. Frank is informed of the incident. He orders the woman to be captured at all costs. In the next moment, Shelley stabs him with a knife. He is a fool and has botched everything. Alice races towards the mountain, but near the summit, her car stalls. She continues on foot. Employees pursue her, and there ahead, the dome. The woman approaches it, her pursuers just steps behind her, and suddenly feels her husband's hands on her shoulders, asking her not to leave him. Shelley reaches out. A strike. Darkness. Visions of the perfect life in victory. And a sigh from a woman waking up in reality. That case when it's hard to take someone's side. The husband deprived his wife of reality with good intentions to make her happy, and probably many would want to escape into the simulation from everyday problems. But can you make someone happy against their will? In the Middle East, a man appears who calls himself the Messiah and gathers crowds of believers in the new Advent. Is he sent by God, or is he a dangerous fraud seeking to disrupt the world's geopolitical order? The story is told through the eyes of people from vastly different backgrounds surrounding the enigmatic man. For 85 days, enemies have besieged Damascus, where a humanitarian catastrophe is growing. There is no food or water, and many people are dying in the shelling. And one day, two teenagers, Jabril and Samir, who have lost their families, see a man in yellow clothes on the street, urging people not to worry about the city's fall because God has predetermined that it will not happen. Salvation in the form of a sandstorm is approaching, and people run under the onslaught of the elements while the preacher does not leave and repeats that salvation is already close. The sandstorm breaks the supply chains of the enemy troops, and they retreat, and the city is saved. FBI agent Eva Geller watches the broadcast of everything that happened, paying attention to the strange man whom people call Al-Masih, and learns that he is leading hundreds of his followers into the desert. At night, the men talk about faith and religion around the fire. Al-Masih asks questions and is strict with those who do not want to think about his questions. Now all of humanity is on the brink, and for people to survive, they must cling to him. After this conversation, the man walks away from the people and stands for a long time looking at the sky, giving the impression that he's talking to God. The teenagers who came with him from Damascus remember how he preached while they hid in the basement, and suddenly Al-Masih calls one of them, Jabril, and tells him that each soul has its own star. He is so light in the boy, and soon Allah will lay a mission on him. Meanwhile, Eva is trying to find out which officers know something about the new Messiah and begins gathering information. Soon she learns that after walking 65 kilometers through the sands, the people reached the borders of Israel and stopped at the fence. Half of the followers believe that Al-Masih has led them to flight, but he orders them to gather all their weapons and bury them. He himself passes through the barbed wire fence, where he is arrested by Israel's border service. An agent from Israel's internal security agency, Aviram Dahan, is called in to interrogate him. However, the detained man refuses to reveal his real name, calling himself a messenger, and impresses the agent by calling him by name and revealing unexpected details from the agent's life that no one except the agent himself could know. Aviram is particularly touched by the incident with the boy that the Messiah reminds him of. Dahan completes the interrogation and leaves the room, destroying the video recording of the interrogation. He then goes to his partner to find out if he has told anyone about what happened in the desert, but his partner remains silent about it. As Aviram gets into his car, he suddenly sees a man with a bag over his head on the back seat, but realizes that it is a flashback to a tragedy from long ago. Early in the morning, the agent returns to work and is surprised to discover that Al-Masih has escaped from custody. Meanwhile, in the small American town of Dili, local preacher Felix Aguero greets his congregation, while the FBI decides to assist Israeli authorities in finding Al-Masih and discovering who he really is. This is why Eva Geller flies to Israel, and her insistence, Aviram is summoned to the office, but he cannot explain why he deleted the video recording. He behaves provocatively, not understanding why he should be accountable to the American woman. Meanwhile, an international conflict is brewing in the world as people who were led by the Messiah to the border of Israel are starving. Even after hearing about his escape, they decide to stay because they believe in his return. One day, volunteers bring food and water, and the Messiah's followers notice that the police are looking for someone in the crowd. They realize that Al-Masih has escaped, which causes unprecedented rejoicing. At the same time, Al-Masih delivers a sermon on the Temple Mount, using apocalyptic phrases about the end of history and calling on those who are willing to go to God's judgment to step forward. A young boy comes forward, but the sermon is interrupted by the Israeli police who try to arrest the Messiah. The operation fails due to a shot that hits the child who has come out. The people start screaming, driving away the invaders. But then Al-Masih lays his hands on the boy, who then stands up unharmed, showing the bloody bullet to the public. The people consider this a miracle while Al-Masih disappears into the crowd. Eva hears the news on the radio and asks to be taken to the scene of the incident. Meanwhile, Muslims also discuss the Messiah's sermon and are quite unhappy with his interpretation of Allah's teachings. The people in the camp cannot understand why their newly found Jesus has abandoned them. And Eva notices the surveillance, and her pursuer turns out to be Aviram, who wants to know why she's meddling in something that's not her business. But Eva is not going to back down. She studies the recordings from the CCTV cameras and notices the strange disappearance of the Messiah. And it's still unclear who fired the shot. She tries to find the injured boy, while in Jerusalem the electricity is shut off to quell the unrest. The agents arrive at the boy's address, but it turns out that his family has left, scared of the crowd's interest. Reports of the incident on the Temple Mount are being shown around the world, and one of them is seen by Father Felix, while his daughter Rebecca dreams of running away from home. Meanwhile, Jabril sees a flickering light at the fence and goes there, while Eva finds Al-Masih in a photo from Jordan. Palestinian girls bring food for the hungry and promise to help people. Jabril goes to get assistance when a man who appears hits him on the head and takes him away from the fence. That same night, the pastor's daughter Rebecca runs away from home, while her disillusioned father decides to burn down his church. The man takes a canister of gasoline and a lighter and heads towards the building. At that moment, a message about an approaching tornado comes to his phone, which was left at home, and the pastor's wife goes to find him. Sirens begin to sound in the town, and the residents hurry to the only shelter, the church, as the tornado begins its deadly circle. Father Felix calls his daughter, hoping she's nearby, and suddenly sees the motionless figure of Al-Masih nearby. Later on, a video of Rebecca's rescue appears in social media, which is intercepted by CIA agents and blocked from spreading. But how did the Messiah end up in America? Soon, Federal Agent Will arrives at the scene. The man is shaken by the sight of the completely destroyed town where only one building, the church, survived, and where Al-Masih is currently located, explaining to the astonished priest that he came here by God's will. Felix is shaken because he was planning to burn down the building that ended up saving everyone's lives. At that moment, Agent Will enters and arrests the Messiah. The priest swears to get Al-Masih out of jail while Aviram interrogates Jabril in the hopes of finding out the Messiah's whereabouts. But the boy does not know. The agent wants to understand why people follow the men unknown to anyone and promises to prove that there is no God. Meanwhile, Felix turns to a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union for help because everything that happened was not a mere coincidence. And Eva arrives in Texas to question Al-Masih, but his lawyer manages to obtain a ban on the meeting. The situation worsens when one of the videos about what happened in the town circumvents their social media block and reaches the mass media. Al-Masih's lawyer tells him that while the charge of illegal entry into the United States is likely to be upheld in court, she can get him out of the federal immigration detention center where he's being held. When the lawyer leaves the detention center, Agent Will informs Eva of this and she rushes to see him. However, during their conversation, Al-Masih turns the situation around in his favor again by showing that he knows her name and sympathizes with her losses, as her mother and husband have passed away. He realizes his responsibility for those who followed him and is willing to help all who are suffering, including her, but Eva doesn't believe his sincerity and runs away, failing to notice the recording device under the table. Returning to her hotel room, Eva talks to her boss, who informs her that Israel is demanding Al-Masih extradition and the state prosecutor will seek permission for it. Later, Al-Masih is taken to court where he is charged, which he admits to, and requests asylum. Eva goes to the lawyer, trying to convince her to stop fighting for the man's release to prevent his extradition. After all, if he returns to Israel, he will be imprisoned, but the lawyer refuses to talk about it. Meanwhile, Aviram again refuses to reveal what happened during the interrogation, whose recording he erased. He's suspended from the case and a hearing is scheduled. At this time, Felix tells his wife about his departure because he's needed by the Messiah. A multitude of Al-Masih's followers gather outside the courthouse. The hearing begins and the lawyer explains that the man cannot return to Israel where he will be persecuted for religious reasons. But the prosecutor claims that the man is lying about being a Muslim because he does not pray 5 times a day as required. The Messiah responds that he belongs to all denominations because everyone walks under the same sun. This causes a storm of emotions around the world, even in high-level offices. The assistant to the President of the United States tries to pressure the judge to deport the unwanted man, and the judge promises to consider it. Meanwhile, Samir finds his friend Jabril abandoned by Aviram in the desert, and he considers it a true miracle that he survived. The next day, the court makes the shocking decision to grant asylum to Mr. Masih, allowing him to leave the courthouse as a free man, with the car of the Venerable Iguero waiting for him outside. People all over the world are talking about the Messiah and beginning to believe in the miracles he performs. In Dili, those seeking healing begin to gather. The Reverend tries to organize their accommodation while Samir faithfully tends to Jabril. The Messiah brought by the pastor settles in isolation from people in a small tent where only Felix has access. One day, the preacher dares to ask Al-Masih about his future plans, and he says he does not know what will happen next. After all, Felix brought him here, and this instills despair in the preacher's soul. He thought that the Messiah was acting according to a preconceived plan. That same evening, Agent Will comes to Eva and shows her a recording of a conversation with Al-Masih. Then he shows her a book by one of the radicals, Wallace, about cultural terrorism, in which the words of the Messiah are repeated verbatim. It turns out that Al-Masih is acting according to this scenario, the goal of which is the destruction of the existing order. Meanwhile, things are going badly for the refugees who remain at the Israeli border without water and food, and soon Samir begins to wonder where Jabril's strong faith comes from. He calls his friend crazy for refusing medical help as his injuries could be fatal, and accuses him of an abnormal love for the Messiah. One day, Aviram's wife notices his car, which has been parked near their house for 3 days, and begins to search for the man, who at this time arrives in Texas and buys a gun at the gun store. And in Dili, every evening people gather together hoping that Al-Masih will come out to them. But the man remains in his tent, bringing Felix into a state of confusion that spills over into a sermon for all who have come. At this time, two residents of Delhi finally find their dog crushed by furniture during the hurricane and try to free it. Al-Masih comes out of his tent just as armed Aviram approaches it. The Messiah calmly looks into the eyes of his killer, and Aviram lowers his gun and looks at the departing man's back. The people notice the Messiah, who is walking towards the house where the man decides to shoot the poor dog as it is suffering greatly. The boy asks Al-Masih to save his dog, but he takes a gun and shoots the dog, causing the boy's anger and pain, and then he leaves the town. At this time, Eva catches up with Aviram and he confesses that he wanted to kill the Messiah, who at that time calls pastor's daughter Rebecca to come with him. Meanwhile, the refugees decide that the Messiah has abandoned them and they decide to return to the city, but Jabril stays behind. In the morning, the young man dreams of his deceased mother, who turns into the Messiah and reaches out to him. At the same time, the Texas police ask the pilgrims not to come to Delhi as the city is completely destroyed. Dissatisfied, the people are ready to expel Al-Masih and Father Felix. They write protest messages about the false prophet on the church walls. Meanwhile, Eva learns the true name of the Messiah, Payamgal Shari, and he has a brother who works at the university. The Messiah tells Father Felix that it is time to get on the road, persuading Felix that this is his destiny. The pastor decides to take his family with him, which upsets his wife but pleases his daughter. Father Felix leads a column of cars that follow the Messiah wherever he leads them. The number of cars is constantly growing and soon it begins to count in the hundreds. Eva also returns to Texas to follow Al-Masih and one night sees him come out to make a call from a payphone on the street. At her request, Agent Will requests a copy of the telephone conversation. The next day, the column continues on its way. Stopping for a break, the pastor hears news of the crisis on the border where the refugees from Palestine are still waiting for their fate. Rebecca takes a picture of the Messiah standing by a road sign in Washington and posts it on social media. In the morning, the column sets off, and Felix learns from the posts that their path leads to the US Capitol. At the same time, Eva checks everything she can find about the Messiah and comes across information that he studied at the same university where the notorious terrorist Wallace taught, whose book Al-Masih quoted during the interrogation. Professor Wallace hacked the stock exchange and then fled to Russia during the investigation into his actions. This means that the case of the alleged attack is completely within Eva's jurisdiction. The huge column arrives in Washington and Al-Masih goes to the Lincoln Memorial, while Jabril has a vision of his late mother and Al-Masih. The Messiah speaks about the unity of people in the world around them, and Jabril suddenly stands up as if hearing his speech. Al-Masih asks to look at himself and his neighbors. Jabril strips naked. The Messiah stands before the nation and looks at them so that they finally look at him. It's too late to kneel, time is up. Jabril walks towards the border. Al-Masih heads for the water. Jabril walks non-stop until a soldier's gun barrel is pressed against his chest, and Al-Masih walks on the water. The Israelis retreat, and Jabril leads the refugees. Hundreds of amazed spectators follow the Messiah's journey and record this on their telephone cameras. The world is buzzing after witnessing the miracles of Al-Masih, and even the Congregation of the Causes of Saints is considering the case. Everywhere there are clashes between the followers and the opponents of the newly emerged Messiah. People are sending money to Father Felix, who intends to build the Church of Al-Masih with it. Meanwhile, Jabril arrives in Western Jordan, where he is welcomed as a liberator. The refugees are brought to a secluded house where they will be given food and shelter. But Jabril is separated from the others as he openly declares his allegiance to Al-Masih. Meanwhile, Eva reports her findings to his superiors. The Messiah has a fairly long trail of connections to banned organizations and, most importantly, to Wallace, who is now hiding in Moscow. Senior officials in the US government are concerned about the popularity of Al-Masih, so the head of the White House staff demands that the CIA do everything possible to discredit him. But Eva reminds them, this is not just terrorism, this is a new level of destabilizing society. Meanwhile, the society is discussing the Messiah with ever-increasing fervor. People are divided into those who unquestionably believe in him and those who consider him a false prophet. Felix preaches on behalf of Al-Masih and reminds people of the importance of faith. The Lord has chosen them specifically, and it is important to understand why. At this time, a woman with a terminally ill child sneaks into the hotel of the Messiah, and the man agrees to take the girl, but only alone. However, his room is under 24-hour surveillance. Meanwhile, the young refugees begin to learn different sciences, among which religion is at the forefront. Sheikh personally comes to Jabril to understand the depth of his faith, and the young man confidently answers that he unquestionably believes in the Messiah. Meanwhile, Eva discusses the Messiah's water-walking feat with Aviram. After all, Jesus did the same thing. He performed tricks and attracted supporters. The man is impressed. She speaks like a true Jew. Agent Will continues to monitor the Messiah's room and one day witnesses a girl knocking on his door, praying for healing. But the man immediately understands the true purpose of her visit. The girl has come to seduce him. He reveals her soul, pitying the woman who sells her body, and from this her soul melts and dies. The girl admits that she was paid for the visit and cries from the moving words of the Messiah, who confesses to her the eternal love of God for his children. These words bring tears to Agent Will's eyes, who is watching the scene. At that time, Rebecca runs out of her parents' room and sees the Messiah escorting the girl out of his own room. The girl runs away and Al-Masih catches up to her on the street. He tries to explain her special place next to him, and the girl shares her observations that the world seems to be on the brink of something grand. The Prophet turns to Rebecca and asks her to do something unimaginable, and she promises to do anything he asks. Meanwhile, the CIA manages to find Al-Masih's brother, who reveals that their parents were of different faiths and died early. The boys were raised by their uncle, a professional illusionist, and Al-Masih always loved being the center of attention. The uncle was a tough man, but he taught the boys everything he knew: English, literacy, and most importantly, how to perform tricks. And at that moment, someone puts a dark bag over Al-Masih's head as he enters his room. The man finds himself in the office of the President of the United States, standing before the head of state and demanding the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from around the world using the President's sincere faith. The politician is shocked. It's simply impossible, since the American troops are used precisely as peacekeepers, and if they are not present, there will be chaos in the countries under their control. However, the Messiah lists the names of countries and cities where Americans have been waging wars. He offers the president the chance to go down in history as a true peacemaker saving the world. And he says that the history has ended and the world will soon start anew. Meanwhile, Eva learns that a few years ago Al-Masih was placed in a psychiatric clinic and goes to the college where the men studied. But the director can't remember anything particularly noteworthy except for his thesis. Eva goes to the archives, but the thesis is not there. In Jordan, the Sheikh shows Jabril an article in a newspaper about the miracles of Al-Masih and asks him to give a speech at the upcoming celebration. The boy must become the leader of the new generation in the struggle for Palestinian independence. The next day, Al-Masih announces to the media about his meeting with the president, and this infuriates Felix, who believes that he should have been informed about it. The president also faces similar attacks. He is heavily guarded against this freak, but he himself goes to the meeting. However, the man interrupts all conversations. He must first think about the people. Angered, Felix expresses his grievance to Al-Masih, and the letter suggests that he kneel before him if he truly believes that he is the Messiah. The preacher thinks it over as the Messiah leaves the room. On the other hand, Agent Will begins to unquestionably believe in Al-Masih and quits his job. Meanwhile, Eva receives the call logs she requested. That same evening, Aviram asks Al-Masih about his family and mocks him, offering to walk on water again. But the man only smiles in response and asks a counter-question: why isn't Aviram leaving? The agent can't answer. The president talks to Al-Masih again and he informs him that there is no more time to think. At that moment, water begins to flood the president's feet. Upon waking up, the man learns about an unprecedented flood destroying the U.S. coastline. Later, the daughter of the Reverend Iguero tells him that Al-Masih came to Texas for her, not for her father. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a guard confesses that he was the one who freed the Messiah from prison, not Aviram Dahan. That same night, the girl hired by the president's assistant to compromise Al-Masih returns all the money she received for it. She doesn't care whether he's real or not. What matters to her is that he's a very good person. Meanwhile, the president flies over the affected areas and, in addition to providing material assistance, urges people to pray and hope for the help of the Lord. At the same time, the pastor's wife asks Al-Masih why he chose their family. He says that faith can be found everywhere, and he wants the same thing that the Lord wants: the flood. Meanwhile, in Jordan, the Sheikh is teaching Jabril about the speeches and Palestine's independence. It's very difficult for the illiterate boy to remember unfamiliar words, but the Sheikh is insistent. His friends are also being heavily influenced at this time, with religious ideas being drilled into their heads. Meanwhile, Reverend Felix asks a famous showman to include Al-Masih in his program. After all, it's a chance to speak to the multimillion audience. Eva checks all the numbers on the list and finds one that Al-Masih calls frequently and talks to the caller for quite some time. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is informed of the buildup of Russian troops on the border with Latvia and is demanded to make a tough decision. On that day, Eva finds Al-Masih to tell him that she knows about his diagnosis, Messiah complex, given to him in the psychiatric clinic, and about his uncle, the magician. She thinks someone is using him and promises to find and arrest the puppeteer. And he confirms that he knows Wallace, who is still his friend despite being accused of terrorism. After that, Felix tells Al-Masih about the invitation to television and he agrees, but only if the Reverend brings his daughter with him. In the evening, Eva talks to her father and is amazed to learn that her own father believes that Al-Masih is the Messiah of the end of times. Meanwhile, it turns out that the complex in the Badia is a terrorist training camp and Samira is being prepared for the role of a suicide bomber. Meanwhile, Eva decides to act on her own and dials the number that Al-Masih constantly calls. She hears Wallace's voice in response, so his theories about Al-Masih's connection to the terrorist are confirmed. But during the conversation, the man refutes all her conclusions. It's a pity, but she doesn't understand what's going on. And of the two of them, he is not the most dangerous one. The woman flips through his book again, reads the dedication on the title page and has an epiphany. Meanwhile, the president requests an analysis of full withdrawal of American troops from Eastern Europe. Eva goes to her boss. Wallace's book is the work of Al-Masih, so it's actually the opposite. The recognized terrorist is a disciple of the Messiah. In the meantime is the day of the television appearance. Al-Masih and Rebecca prepare for their performance. At the mosque, many believers come to listen to Jabril's first speech. The boy is very nervous, but the sheikh is nearby and guides him. The show host warms up the audience before the Messiah's appearance on stage, while Samira is also being taken to the mosque. But just before going on stage, the Messiah leaves the studio and gets into a car, while Samira puts on the suicide bomber belt. The audience demands the Messiah's appearance and Rebecca takes the stage. Jabril starts his speech about the Messiah simultaneously with Rebecca, while Al-Masih is driving in Avram's car. The teenagers repeat his words to the audiences, "We are all one people." At that moment, Samir enters the mosque, shows the explosive device attached to his chest and raises the button. Looking into Jabril's eyes, he can't bring himself to press the button. However, Samir's mentor remotely activates the bomb vest. Rebecca suddenly loses consciousness in the studio. A powerful explosion rocks the mosque. The action moves back several years when Avram and his partner kidnapped, interrogated and killed an underage son of one of those who had organized an explosion in which Avram's mother died. But it turned out that the boy was not the man's son at all and it is still haunting the agent. In the present, he himself is driving the Messiah to the airport to deliver him to Israel. After the mosque bombing, the victims are given help. Unconscious Jabril is carried out on a stretcher. The same thing happens to Rebecca. Meanwhile, Eva Gela learns that Al-Masih has been kidnapped. The CIA tracks the plane on which he's being taken, unaware that it was all done on the orders of the president's assistant. Rebecca wakes up and tells her father that the Messiah is gone, and he will not return. Jabril wakes up in the back of a truck and sees a dead man next to him. He squeezes his hand and the fingers twitch under his palm. Eva finds out that the plane with the Messiah has taken off from a government airfield, and her boss tries to pressure higher-ups to find out the plane's destination, threatening to tell the president about everything that has happened and thus driving the country's leader's assistant into a corner. At the same time, in the sky, Al-Masih talks to Avram, persuading him to free his conscience because God still loves him, and that people always choose between good and evil, and the last thing he will see before he dies is the face of that boy. Meanwhile, the president's assistant decides to reveal Al-Masih's true name to the press and the folder with his dossier, highlighting his mental illness and the fact that he was raised by an illusionist. In the sky, the plane begins to experience severe turbulence. There is an explosion in the tail and Aviram sees the face of the deceased boy in front of him, whose face is being covered by the Messiah's hands. In the command center, Eva is informed that the plane's signals have disappeared from the radar. She realizes that a tragedy has occurred. On TV, news reports reveal the Messiah's real name and biography, causing confusion among Al-Masih's followers. After hearing everything, Felix leaves the hospital. Jabril also watches Messiah's brother talk about his ability to perform magic tricks. Eva accuses the president's assistant of destroying the diplomatic plane, but he warns her to watch her tongue. The woman is overwhelmed because the entire operation has collapsed and she cannot prove anything. Meanwhile, Father Felix arrives at his church and sets it on fire. He no longer believes in anything. Meanwhile, Aviram wakes up in the middle of blooming poppies and sees the Messiah above him. Then a local boy appears before him, offering him a flask of water and enthusiastically stating that the man has performed a miracle. He resurrected Aviram and another man. They both were unquestionably dead, with gray faces and flies crawling over them. Then he touched them and they came back to life. The agent watches in amazement as his partner bows to the perfectly unharmed Messiah standing in front of him. The film is a story about the coming of the Messiah, the prophet, in the modern world. It is an interesting and easy-to-understand film with deep thoughts expressed by Al-Masih in conversations with completely different people, ranging from an illiterate boy to the President of the United States. On the one hand, it is a weird combination, but on the other hand, it is quite understandable as the Messiah claims that we all walk under one sun. The crew of the spaceship is in cryogenic sleep. Astronaut George Taylor is dictating his final report. Exactly half a year ago by the ship's time, they left Cape Canaveral. Over 7 centuries have passed on Earth during this period. The people who sent them on this journey have long since died. But Taylor has no regrets about what they've done. Everything seems different from here. The flow of time is distorted and space is limitless. The only thing he would like to know is whether humanity, the miracle of the universe that sent him into the sky, continues to wage war. A last glance at the clock. It's March 27, 2673 on Earth. He looks at his comrades and lies down in his place. After a while, the ship makes an emergency landing on an unknown planet and finds itself in the middle of a body of water. The crew wakes up and realizes that they have slept much longer than the calculated time. But the most horrifying shock is the death of the only woman, Stewart. At that moment, water begins to enter the ship. They need to evacuate, especially since the samples showed that the atmosphere is suitable for breathing. Looking at the ship's clock, which is frozen at Earth time, November 25, 3978, the crew abandons the sinking ship. Boarding a life raft, the humans sail to shore, marveling at the grandeur of the surrounding nature. There is no sign of intelligent life anywhere. Taylor reminds them that they are 320 light-years from Earth on an unknown planet in the constellation Orion. It is impossible to determine more precisely as no one has had time to look at the instrument readings. Upon landing on the shore, Taylor takes inventory of what they were able to salvage from the ship. A pistol, 20 rounds of ammunition, a first aid kit, and a 3-day supply of food and water. The only question now is how long is a day here? They are discussing the strange death of Stewart, apparently caused by depressurization. It seems they were flying for 18 months, while on Earth it has been about 2,000 years. There is no hope of returning, and time has erased everything they knew. Therefore, they need to start studying this planet. Analysis show that nothing can grow here as there is very little carbon dioxide. But there is nothing dangerous to human health either. They have 72 hours left until they run out of food. Landon sets up a small flag of the United States of America on the shore and the astronauts set off on their journey. The surroundings are strange and wild, bizarre rocks and lifeless canyons. The people almost get trapped under landslides several times. Thunderbolts light up the sky without bringing rain, and the sky itself is covered with clouds with no satellites or landmarks. One thing they know for sure, there's a time gap between them and Earth. Their loved ones died 20 centuries ago. Even if they returned, no one would remember them. Taylor urges his comrades on. Why did they embark on this flight? Was it for fame, new knowledge, or the opportunity to live longer? But now they have lived much longer than any other human on Earth. Only Taylor set out on this journey because he's a dreamer. He is confident that there must be something better than humans in the universe. At that moment, Dodge calls out to them. He has found life. A barely noticeable green shoot has sprouted from rocky desert. This means there are plants here and they need to find them. The group continues forward. Everywhere they look, they see unfriendly rocks, but ahead they see green bushes and some strange crosses that resemble scarecrows. After walking a little further, the astronauts are thrilled to finally see water ahead. The excited group quickly sheds their clothes and jumps in. After that, they swim towards the shore and notice human footprints on the sand. Suddenly, they see dark figures stealing their clothes. The men chase after the thieves, who leave behind obvious traces of their path, such as broken clothing and scraps. Soon they come across their torn clothes and put on whatever remains. Finally, they reach a plain and see many people behaving quite strangely. They are silent and pay no attention to the astronauts, instead calmly gathering and eating different fruits. The Earthlings are puzzled as their fellow humans seem almost feral. Luckily, they are not cannibals. Suddenly, an ominous sound comes from the forest and the people start running. The astronauts try to understand what is happening and suddenly see armed riders. Shots are fired and then monkeys appear on the clearing, apparently hunting the humans. The Earthlings attempt to flee and in the heat of the chase they split up. Shots are heard from all directions and Dodge is killed. Taylor, along with others, runs towards the river, and just when it seems like he's about to make it, one of the monkeys shoots him in the neck, rendering him unconscious. The tied-up astronaut is thrown into a cell with other prisoners. He's surprised to see the monkeys taking pictures as if it's a souvenir. George is brought to a hospital where he's examined by scientist monkeys. They examine Taylor, who's wearing strange clothing. But two chimpanzees argue about the need to study the animal's brains, ignoring Taylor, who's still recovering from his throat wound and unable to speak. In the morning, Dr. Zyra does her rounds. She's intrigued by a strange animal she calls Bright Eyes because he pretends to talk in a hilariously convincing way. Taylor tries to demonstrate that he's intelligent and attempts to snatch the pencil from Zyra's hand. At that moment, Dr. Zaius enters. Zyra shows him the exceptional human, but Zaius is skeptical and sees him merely imitating. Zyra tries to draw attention to the human's uniqueness by highlighting his unconventional use of a blanket as clothing and his unusual hand movements. Perhaps he's intelligent, but Zaius is irritated, dismissing it all as cheap tricks. Humans are dangerous and must be destroyed. Later, they bring a female human as a gift and lock her in Taylor's cell. The next day, George and his companion are walking in the yard in a large cage. Zyra brings her fiancé, an archaeologist named Cornelius, to show him Taylor, but Cornelius sees nothing special about him. While the apes argue, George writes in the sand, but nobody pays attention to him. At that moment, Dr. Zaius arrives, annoyed at Zyra with her human again. Suddenly, a wild man attacks George and a fight breaks out. The guards drag Taylor away and Zaius sees the letters George wrote but quickly erases them. Zyra apologizes to Taylor, but he snatches the paper and pencil and writes his name on the piece of paper. Zyra is astonished and takes him home. Cornelius doesn't believe her stories. It's all just tricks. Humans can't write. They try to figure out where he learned it and Taylor writes the name of his school. The apes are shocked. Could he really be intelligent? The man explains that they came from another planet. Cornelius is puzzled, but flying is impossible. Then Taylor crafts a paper airplane. Afterwards, he asks to see the maps and explains where they landed and how they got there. Zyra and Cornelius argue fervently. She claims that humans are a mutation, the missing link between apes and monkeys, and it is quite possible that monkeys evolved from humans. Dr. Zaius, who enters the scene, discovers the paper airplane, crushes it, and orders the man to be taken to a cell. Taylor and Nova sleep in their cell when the arriving apes order Taylor to be prepared for a castration operation, but the man breaks free and runs out of the cell. He manages to hide in the ape temple but is noticed, and the man has to run through the ape city again. Taylor ends up in a museum where stuffed humans are exhibited. Shocked, he runs out into the street but gets caught in a net, where Zyra finds him. And then the voice returns to Taylor, shocking the apes. Later in the cell, Taylor tries to teach Nova how to speak, but the apes take the girl away and put her in the cell across from him. The man tells her about his life on Earth, but he didn't love anyone there. He wonders if Nova can love. The apes put a collar on him and take him to trial. A hearing is now taking place, and Zyra and Cornelius are ready to act as his attorneys. The judges are outraged. He has no rights because he's not an ape. But then what is he being tried for? The court gives a continuance to his lawyers, but Taylor intends to defend himself. A theologian scientist is called to testify, trying to prove the man's irrationality as he does not know the answers to the simplest questions. But Taylor cannot know them as he has not studied their culture. A person is prohibited from speaking, so he writes his statement and submits it to the court. Cornelius reads that Taylor is a space explorer and arrived from another planet, but the apes do not believe him. They demand to bring the people captured with him, and Taylor sees Landon, but he does not recognize his friend, and the scar is found on his head. George realizes that Dr. Zaius destroyed the man's brain. George is dragged back to the court, and then Cornelius defends Taylor. He did not lie when he said he came from the Forbidden Zone. He described it very accurately, and Cornelius himself was there, and he found traces of ancient ape culture. Zyra continues the defense. If he did not come from another planet, he was born on this one. She found no reason why people cannot speak. The problem is not in anatomy but in the brain, and that is the truth, but nobody wants to listen. Zyra and Cornelius are accused of scientific heresy and the tribunal is closed. The fate of the man is predetermined. He is handed over to Zaius, who intends to perform operations on him. George is outraged. How could such an upside-down civilization arise? And most importantly, why is Zaius so afraid of him? Zyra cannot accept this and organizes the escape of Taylor and Nova. Outside the city, Cornelius meets them with horses and supplies. He suggests returning to the spacecraft landing site. A small caravan sets off and reaches the river. If they follow it, they will reach the sea. Soon they reach the place where Cornelius was excavating. He's ready to take the man to the cave. And then Zyra sees the pursuit. Dr. Zaius, who caught up with the fugitives, is in for an unpleasant surprise. Taylor is armed. The Earthling offers a compromise to the doctor. If Cornelius can prove that their culture is not the oldest and originated from humans, he will leave them alone. Everyone goes into the cave. While Cornelius shows off his findings, Taylor discovers spare parts of a human, a dental plate, glasses, and a heart valve. But the main discovery is a human doll that says the word "Mama." Zaius tries to find a reasonable explanation when gunshots are heard outside. Everyone rushes to the exit. It's the makeshift doctors who, unable to keep their words, have attacked the fugitives' escorts. Taylor takes Dr. Zaius hostage and orders everyone to leave. Taylor will release him in exchange for a horse, food, and water for him and his woman. But before leaving, he asks the doctor why he always feared him, and he answers because he's a man, and that his ancestors are to blame for the lifeless Forbidden Lands, for he is the lowest and most treacherous beast. The people leave, and the doctor orders the cave to be blown up and Zyra and Cornelius to be arrested. He saves the future of his people. Taylor and Nova ride along the beach. Suddenly, the man jumps off the horse in horror. He has returned, and they did it after all. They blew them all up and destroyed civilization, let them burn in hell. Nova looks at Taylor in fear. She doesn't understand what is before her. The upper part of the Statue of Liberty rising on the ocean shore. The film is based on the book by French writer Pierre Boulle, who considered his novel one of his least successful works and therefore had serious doubts about its success on the big screen. But in the end, the film ranked 350th on Empire magazine's list of the 500 greatest films. The film takes place in the small town of Wengenberg, where a young girl named Yennefer lives with a skewed face and a disgusting hump in the family of a cowman. Because of her ugly appearance, the girl is constantly mocked by the locals, and one day when Yennefer is once again mocked by a couple of local young men, the girl accidentally opens a portal to the magical Tor Lara in Aretuza, where she's met by the young wizard Istrid. The guy is concerned. All magic leaves traces, which wizards can use to find someone who has even an ounce of magic in them. He decides to save the budding sorceress and opens a safe portal that brings Yennefer home. Time later, a beautiful and wealthy lady arrives at the farm of the girl's father to buy a pig. But upon seeing the girl, she expresses a desire to buy her too. And the father, who does not hide his disgust for his daughter, sells her for half the price of the animal, despite the pleas of her mother, who recognizes the lady as a witch. So Yennefer finds herself in the magical school of the enchantress Tisaid of Rees, where several girls are already studying. At first, Yennefer takes the separation from home hard, and how low her father judged her. She even tried to commit suicide, but when classes begin, she discovers that the young wizard was right. It was her inadvertent wizardry that caused the wave and caught the attention of the school's rector, the wizardess Tisaya. The girls who study at the school have also distinguished themselves with the same unique skills. Soon Tisaya holds the first test. The girls must lift a stone and a flower without touching them and using a spell. Everyone more or less manages to cope with the task, but Yennefer fails. The girl stubbornly tries again and again until Tissaia stops her. Frustrated, Yennefer runs away. Later, she finds Istrid in the cave and tells him her name. Sometime later, Tissaia trains her female pupils to recognize man's greatest fear. She sees the girls in pairs and orders them to look into each other's eyes until they get inside their rival schemes. Yennefer pairs up to encourage the girl, but she again fails. Tissaia is enraged. Yennefer is useless. And this is because she's lying to herself. Even if she were a beauty, no one would love her. Although she's not the only one to whom she has problems, Yennefer shares the problems with her only friend, Istrid, who talks about her schooling. He too was having a hard time with everything. The boy offers to read his mind, and the girl succeeds. One night, Tissaia wakes the girls in the middle of a storm and takes them to the Tor Lara, the most powerful magic place in the continent, entrance to which is only open to members of the Wizard Brotherhood. Today there will be a test in the art of controlling the flows of chaos, which requires catching lightning in a bottle. The girls do not believe in such a possibility, and some get strong discharges even after catching the lightning. Yennefer's turn comes, and she reaches up with the bottle, but it is thrown back against the wall. Enraged, she directs her power at her more fortunate opponent, Tissaia, blocking her mental blow. Later, she reprimands her apprentice she almost killed today, which means that her emotions can ruin her own. Tissaia cannot be sure that Yennefer will not go along with her feelings and harm his school, for she's to become a court sorceress, and the weak have no place near a ruler. The enchantress already doubts that there's anything in her that the wizarding chapter needs. Frustrated, Yennefer tells Istrid everything. But most importantly, the enchantress knows all about them and they won't be able to see each other again. The guy is willing to show her other, more ancient and powerful magic, but it is very dangerous. He shows her the skulls of the dead elves who built Aretuza. They were the first wizards of the continent, and they were the ones who built all the magical places. But humans came to the continent and slaughtered them. Istrid gives her a flower that can only grow where the elder blood rests and reads a spell, which by repeating it the girl opens a portal. The astonished wizard does not understand how she managed to do it the first time, and Yennefer confesses that her real father was a half-elf who died in the purge. It was his blood that made her ugly. The boy kisses Yennefer and confesses his love. Later, she shows Tissaia the flower. It turns out that this was her assignment, to get the plant by applying the skills of false emotion. Yennefer hopes to be elevated. The enchantress promises that she will soon hear a knock and know when it is time. Meanwhile, Istrid is also reporting to his mentor Strigobor about what he has learned about the girl. One night, Yennefer hears a knock at her neighbor's door and, taking the flower, goes after them. She peeks out as Tissaia turns the four of them into eels. The enchantress knows the girl is here and orders her to come out and push her former fellow students into the water. They are now the conduits of magic for Aretuza. Yennefer performs this and then sees many silhouettes of former schoolmates in the water. Time passes. Yennefer enjoys a love affair with Istrid, applying what she has learned to enhance the effect of intimacy. Thus, one day she created a whole crowd that watched her intimacy and then rewarded the lovers with applause. The guy is amazed at her imagination. What will she come up with next time? So the day of the final rite is approaching, after which they will be masters of their own destiny. Yennefer dreams of graduating from Aretuza and returning to her native Aedirn as a powerful sorceress to show her longtime abusers and her father what she's been able to achieve. In addition, all Aretuza graduates are perfected before being sent to the different kingdoms. All physical defects are removed, which awaits Yennefer as well. The wizard in charge shows her his work, the flawless beauty of the graduates, and promises her an equally wonderful result. He suggests making her color a noble but strong gray. Tissaia, on the other hand, teaches her to look in the mirror and see what Yennefer herself wants. She orders the girl to close her eyes and imagine the most powerful woman in the world. Yennefer complies with the order but does not yet see the promised beauty. Meanwhile, the chapter of wizards gathers in Aretuza to decide where their graduates should go, for all kings need court wizards. Then it transpires that one of the leaders of the council, the wizard Strigobor, knows that Yennefer is a quarter elf, which means that she will not be accepted at Aretuza, where there is a prejudice against elves. The chapter vows to send Yennefer to Nilfgaard, which the aspiring enchanter does not like. She demands an audience with the chapter, but Tissaia declares herself in charge of the distribution. Yennefer is beside herself. She has no intention of wasting her life serving the king of a small southern kingdom and a lover of women. The tutor reminds her of the elven blood, and the girl understands how Stregobor knew about it. The initiation ceremony begins, which Yennefer does not attend. Worried, Istrid finds her behind a letter to her father asking him to confirm that she's his own daughter. The boy does not believe that this letter can convince the chapter. But the girl simply does not know what to do, for even if Istrid disproves his words about her origins, no one will believe him anymore. The enchanter is frustrated. He didn't know why Stregobor needed this information, and she has already missed all the initiation spells. Istrid suggests that she should go with him, for he has been offered to become an explorer. They can travel the continent and discover the unknowable. But unexpectedly, the girl cruelly ridicules his plan. She's not going to dig through the dust of the ages at all, and these are his dreams and intentions, and her opinion, as always, he does not even ask. Istrid is shocked. Yennefer is not at all what he thought she was, and he expresses his opinion that she's angry because she missed her chance to find beauty. But a girl needs power, and she didn't experience so much hardship studying at the magic school for nothing. Yennefer runs to the enchanter, who is in charge of perfection, and demands to show her art. Not even the lack of a potion to dull the terrible pain that accompanies the transformation process stops her. As the magician begins the process, Yennefer asks for her eyes and the cut marks on her hands as a reminder of her former weakness, and the wizard informs her that every magic has a price. Having been reborn, she will not be able to walk. But the girl agrees to everything, even to the removal of her womb necessary for a complete transformation. The magician reads spells, and the girl screams in terrible pain and rips the chains with which she was tied to the table. Her spine straightens, her entire body seems to melt and shift from one form to another. Finally, writhing in pain, Yennefer loses consciousness. Meanwhile, in the main hall of Aretuza, the initiation ball continues. Suddenly, Tisaya sees a door opening in which stands an unusually beautiful girl with violet eyes. She realizes that Yennefer has disobeyed her orders and hurries to take her away. But it is too late. The Aedern ruler has already noticed the beauty. He invites her to a dance where he expresses his desire to see her as court wizard in his kingdom. Tisaya has to retreat and only watch the dance of the king and the enchantress from afar. Directed based on a series of books by Sapkowski, The Witcher is quite curious, fascinating, and vivid. The atmosphere of magic, the world of monsters and steel swords transferred quite well, so the adventures of the female protagonist will be even more exciting in the next episodes. One day, oceanographer Tom's family, his wife Julia and 2 children, Cassie and Ben, set off on a yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are busy fishing and Cassie is absorbed in her gadget, Julia goes for a swim. Suddenly, something unsettles her. Julia looks around, but the sea remains as calm as ever. However, she feels a distinct sense of dread, as though something large and dangerous is circling around. At the same time, the instruments on the yacht start acting strangely, but Tom, preoccupied with fishing, pays no attention to them. Meanwhile, Julia feels worse and eventually begins to drown. She screams, but the family doesn't hear her. The water seems to shift and pull her farther from the yacht. As the situation becomes critical, Tom finally hears her voice. He rushes to the helm, and the yacht moves toward the distant Julia. Tom dives into the water. With the children's help, they pull her aboard and revive her. Tom is angry, as he always asks that swimmers notify the others when going into the water. Julia apologizes and the incident is soon forgotten. Besides, the family has a reason to celebrate. Today is their son Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lights the candles on the cake and everyone congratulates Ben, who receives gifts, while Cassie takes a group photo of the happy family. At that moment, Cassie's boyfriend calls her. He asks her about the swim, but suddenly a sudden and intense storm begins in the background. Cassie is worried, but her boyfriend reassures her that he's safe. The connection cuts off. Cassie tells her parents about the storm on land, but then everyone feels some jolts, rushes to the deck, and sees massive whale carcasses surfacing around the yacht. Tom explains that sometimes whales get disoriented during storms, but these animals are pushing the yacht, threatening their safety. Tom dives into the water and soon returns aboard, injured. While trying to figure out what's going on, he cut himself on the propeller. Julia stitches up the cut on her husband's shoulder, and he explains that the yacht's shafts seem bent, likely from a tail strike. Now they're unlikely to be able to sail away. Later, Cassie tries to re-establish communication, but there's no signal. The radio isn't picking up any signals either. Tom begins calculating their supplies. There's enough water for about 4 days, no more, but they're on a shipping route, so someone is bound to find them. However, ominous sounds come from outside, and when the family steps out onto the deck, they see glowing objects falling from the sky. They fall closer and closer, and Tom, taking a risk, starts the engine. He manages to steer the yacht away from the next meteorite, but the engine is finally damaged. The next object falls so close that the family can see they are artificial satellites of Earth. A strong wind starts blowing, and the instruments go haywire. The terrified family hides inside the yacht, which is being tossed by the waves. They put on life jackets and prepare for the worst when a strange, ringing sound is heard, causing nosebleeds and nausea. Tom tries to signal for help with a flare gun, but it's all in vain. The family barely survives the night. In the morning they were relieved to find themselves alive, but there's a gaping hole in the side of the yacht, and it's unclear why they're still afloat. The family goes outside and freezes in amazement. The water is gone, and their boat is standing on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a stony desert where the ocean once was. Sometime later, Tom tries to reassure his family, saying that not everyone could have perished. He takes measurements and realizes that the compass is lying. North isn't where it's supposed to be. This means the Earth's poles have shifted. Such a thing has happened on Earth before, but a long time ago. It turns out that the sea has retreated to where the land used to be, and most likely humanity has perished. Cassie can't bear this revelation and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia goes to inventory the remaining supplies, while Ben releases a bunch of colorful balloons into the sky, hoping survivors will come to their aid. Meanwhile, Tom turns on the radio, sending out distress signals. Unexpectedly, he hears a response. It's from Naoto, the captain of a small submersible. They were deep underwater when the catastrophe happened, and that's why they survived. However, all communication systems have failed, and expecting help is futile. According to his calculations, the sea will return in about a week, and it will be harsh, so the man advises them to find higher ground and stay there. Julia orders the children to pack their things. Tom directly asks the captain if he can save their children. Naoto explains that the submersible is very small. Unfortunately, Naoto's partner died, and he can only take one person. After some persuasion, Tom convinces Naoto to take both children, and he provides his coordinates. Tom charts a course on the nautical map and promises to reach the location in a couple of days. The next morning, the family is almost ready to embark on their journey. Tom steps onto the deck and suddenly sees a man with a dog approaching. He walks toward him and greets him, but notices that the man is injured. He offers the traveler some water. The man drinks it and then suddenly punches Tom in the face, which Julia sees. She rushes to her husband as the traveler plunges a makeshift spear into Tom's chest. The dog keeps Julia at bay, though she freezes in horror herself. Realizing there's no saving her husband, she runs to the yacht. The man pursues her, injuring her arm. Nevertheless, Julia climbs onto the deck, and the children, hearing her screams, run to her aid. Together, they barricade the doors to the cabin. After that, Julia hides Cassie and Ben in a locker, giving her daughter the flare gun and instructing her to shoot only as a last resort. Meanwhile, the killer tries to break down the doors and eventually succeeds. Julia hides in the bathroom, patching up her wound. Entering, the intruder heads straight to the galley and grabs some food. It's clear that he's very hungry. Holding a can of food, the man begins searching the yacht, while Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. He enters the cabin, but the woman jumps overboard, hiding beneath the yacht. The killer peers through the hole but doesn't see her. However, the dog attacks Julia, forcing her to kill it. The man hears the yelp, goes outside, and finds the dog's body. Meanwhile, Julia climbs back onto the yacht through the portholes on the opposite side. She falls straight into the killer's hands. He beats her, throws her onto a couch, and grabs her throat, intending to strangle her. Cassie witnesses all this and realizes it's the last resort. She opens the locker and fires at the man. The shot throws him to the side, but the flare sets the yacht on fire. Julia orders the children to flee while she sneaks into the galley. The killer, only injured, tries to attack again. Julia kicks him away, grabs the packed bags, and jumps overboard, where Ben finds his father's body. Cassie runs to the corpse and sobs over it. Julia kisses her deceased husband, but seeing the killer leap from the burning yacht, she takes the children and leaves. The boat explodes behind them. The family runs across the stony desert and soon takes shelter in a rocky canyon, where a stream flows. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares a small amount of water with her brother, but he refuses to drink. The boy feels guilty, believing the killer came because he saw the balloons. Cassie also voices this thought, but Julia orders her to stop and defends her son, explaining that he didn't mean any harm. She tells the children to gather themselves, as a long journey awaits. And then she spots the killer again, still relentlessly following their trail. The family hurries onward. That evening, Ben finds the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it. But Julia sees the pursuer and orders the children to run. They soon come across a field of once flooded toxic waste barrels, but Julia urges the children forward despite the threat of contamination, knowing the killer is still on their heels. The family walks along the former ocean floor, weaving through piles of plastic and other trash dumped by humans. Soon, Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated and gives him the last drops of water. Cassie has a breakdown, convinced that they have no chance of survival, but Julia commands them to keep moving. Eventually, they find the fuselage of a plane that crashed into the sea long ago and crawl inside to rest. Julia examines the last photo of their family and recounts the story of her first meeting with Tom, which happened at her hospital, where Tom was brought with decompression sickness after a failed dive. The children weep, remembering their father and saying their final goodbyes to him. At night, Cassie is awakened by a noise and steps outside to sit near the plane. Out of the darkness, the killer approaches her, unaware that the girl is acting as bait. As he prepares to grab her, Julia ambushes him, stabbing the man with a knife. At dawn, the family prepares to continue their journey, only to discover the killer's body has been scavenged. A sign that something even more dangerous than humans lurks in the desert. They move on. Julia consults the map when Ben suddenly rushes ahead. His mother yells for him to stop, but the boy sprints toward a salty puddle and manages to drink a few gulps. Julia drags him away, but the boy becomes sick. Soon they come across some plastic chairs and build a makeshift shelter from the sun, resting inside it. Suddenly, Julia hears strange sounds. She steps outside and sees something that forces her to wake the children. Realizing the new danger, they begin running. Soon they spot a large ship in the distance, surrounded by crashed containers and a few wandering people. Julia calls out to them, but they, seeing thousands of giant crabs, dash into a container and lock the doors, ignoring her pleas for help. The three climb onto a container, though the crabs manage to wound Julia in the leg. Nevertheless, Julia, Cassie, and Ben sit on top, watching the crabs penetrate through a crack in the doors, killing everyone inside despite the people's attempts to fend them off. Julia ties a scarf around her leg and passes out. The next morning, she wakes up alone, terrified, and calls for the children. But it turns out the crabs have moved on, and the children had gone down to search for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound while Ben examines the found weapons. Searching through the containers, they find a small amount of food and water. In the pocket of one of the deceased, Julia finds a radio and contacts Naoto. He responds, explaining that he was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, the sea will return soon, which is why the creatures have emerged. Julia begs him to save her children, but she's unsure where to go because she's lost the map. Naoto fires a flare. Ben sees the direction, and the family rushes toward it. Soon they see a yellow submarine in the distance, but reaching it is difficult due to the terrain of the former seabed. Cassie dislikes her mother's talk about saving the children, but Julia refuses to answer and pushes the family onward. They are forced to pass through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. At one point, they are caught in a rock slide, and Julia becomes separated from the children. She orders them to continue, and when Cassie refuses, Julia pleads with her to save her brother. Cassie and Ben make it out of the canyon and reach the submarine, but inside, there's no one. Suddenly, Naoto, badly wounded, emerges from behind the boat. He admits that he has no chance of surviving and orders them to climb aboard, but Cassie goes back for her mother, who is fending off the emerging crabs. Her bullets nearly depleted, Cassie climbs the rock barrier and extends her hand to her mother. They manage to reach the submarine just as the crabs overrun Naoto, who dies in their claws. The family climbs aboard, and just then an ocean wave crests over the horizon. The water lifts the submarine and drags it across the rocks, and as Julia watches everything that happened over the past few days flash before her eyes, she passes out. When she awakens, she finds the vessel at a standstill. Julia opens the hatch, and the family emerges to find themselves in a ruined city, carried there by the wave. Despite a great concept, the film failed to make an impact, largely due to the many mistakes made by its creators.
Welcome to the show.
A man is running through a dark forest in Ireland. He seems frightened despite constantly encountering signs with the words "point of no return" and various numbers, indicating either directions or distances to something. However, he fails to escape. Darkness quickly envelops the surroundings, a flock of birds flies overhead, and he falls into a pit. In the next moment, an invisible force grabs him and drags him away. Elsewhere in the country lives an artist named Minna, who works in a pet store. One day, her boss asks her to deliver a rare parrot to a zoo in a neighboring city, and Minna agrees. She takes the bird home for the night. There, she tells the parrot that her mother died 15 years ago. Suddenly, the bird starts to respond. In the evening, Minna puts on a wig and goes to a bar where she introduces herself to a guy with a fictitious name, claiming to be a ballerina. In the morning, Minna apologizes to the parrot for her behavior, saying the real her would probably not be liked. Finally, the pair set off on their journey. On the way, her sister Lucy calls, reminding her that she has family and nieces who love and await her. Minna continues driving and eventually ends up on a road leading into an old dark forest. Unexpectedly, the car breaks down and stalls, and the connection also mysteriously cuts off. Taking the parrot's cage, Minna steps onto the road to seek help, but the forest is dark and empty. When she returns to where she left the car, the road is deserted. Minna continues to wander through the quickly darkening area, talking to the bird to keep herself cheerful and suggesting they name it Darwin. Suddenly, she notices a woman running past and decides to follow her. Minna catches up with her near a small forest cabin, and the woman, opening the door, orders her to come inside quickly if she wants to live. Naturally, Minna rushes into the cabin. The elderly woman is named Madeline. She has been living here for some time with two other young people, Ciara and Daniel. She immediately orders Minna to stand in front of a mirror because the watchers cannot enter inside but observe from outside, coming every night after sunset. Standing by the mirror, Minna suddenly hears sounds like applause. Madeline confirms her suspicions. The watchers are applauding the appearance of a new object. In the morning, Minna announces that she intends to leave. Although the others assure her it's impossible, she heads into the forest. Madeline catches up with her, explaining that the forest causes hallucinations. But it is possible to survive here. The signs scattered throughout the forest mark the boundary from which a person can reach the cabin before dark. But if you go beyond the boundary, there will be no way back. They were made by a man named the Professor. But where he is now, no one knows. That night, Daniel puts on a show for the watchers, presenting them with the newcomer, but they ask her to behave as usual. Meanwhile, Ciara turns on the music and dances, as she does every evening. Minna, on the other hand, finds discs with recordings of Love Search TV shows. In the morning, she and Ciara go to gather medicinal herbs, because her missing husband asked the girl to take care of Daniel. Then the man went to search for a way out and disappeared. Ciara explains that recently they found strange burrows scattered throughout the forest. That's where the watchers go during daylight hours. She believes she has been in the cabin for almost 5 months. Later, Madeline announces the safety rules. Never leave at night, never open the doors for anyone, always try to stay in the light. Strange life begins with entirely identical days. Minna watches endless shows and often stands staring into the mirror. One day she knocks on it, and immediately there is a knock on the door. Madeline orders everyone to freeze and everything stops. The next day she and Daniel go hunting. The boy tells her that Madeline used to work at the university, so she considers herself a know-it-all. But she has been living here the longest. Daniel himself has been in the cabin for 8 months, but has never seen anyone. After listening to the boy, Minna convinces Daniel to help her explore a burrow. Using a rope, Minna descends, explores it, and finds old items, newspapers, toys, pieces of electronics, and an old bicycle, which she ties to the rope and sends up. But then strange sounds, similar to those heard at night outside the cabin walls, echo from the darkness. Minna screams and the rope falls at her feet. Climbing out into the light, Minna leaves the dangerous place, and they calmly examine the items. With the bicycle, it might be possible to escape from here, but Madeline has a rather strange reaction to this. Meanwhile, Daniel manages to assemble a surveillance system from the found pieces of electronics and installs a camera by the door. At night, everything goes as usual. Ciara dances when there is a knock on the door, and Daniel suggests that a person has come. Madeline forbids opening it, but they hear the voice of Ciara's husband. Ciara tries to prove that it is John by asking him what book she is reading, but he does not answer. Although they bought this book together on his advice, the man begs to be saved from death. Ciara asks to look into the camera, but when he leans towards it, something drags him into the forest. Immediately there is a knock on the mirror stronger than ever before. Madeline stands in front of the people, as if shielding them, and the knocking stops. In the morning, Madeline throws the bicycle into the burrow, demanding that they no longer break the rules. Later, Mina recalls her sister and mother, who invited the girls for a car ride. The weather was beautiful and Mina opened the window. Her mother asked her to close it because the wind was bothering her, but Mina didn't listen, mimicking her mother, who got distracted from the road. The tragedy happened, for which Mina still feels guilty. Winter soon arrived. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and food became increasingly scarce. Quarrels began to flare up among the cabin's inhabitants. One day, Sierra left for the forest. Mina caught up with her, and she confessed that she felt John was real. She runs to the house from where Daniel's screams are heard, angry with Madeline and Mina, refusing to let them inside. The women hide under a tree and soon see lanky, spider-like monsters emerging from the forest, approaching the cabin window, and making terrible, shrill noises. The watchers stare at Daniel and Sierra while Mina and Madeline wait for them to leave so they can return to the cabin. When they do, the women rush to the door and beg to be let in. Daniel refuses, and then Mina tells him about her guilt towards her mother. She asks him to understand that he will suffer all his life, realizing that he is responsible for the death of people. The doors open. The four of them immediately stand in front of the mirror, hoping to convince the watchers that they are in place. Madeline admits that she tried to protect them from certain things. She used to teach history and mythology, and unlike them, came here voluntarily. Only here did she realize how dangerous this place was. Once she hunted alone and saw herself at sunset. Not an exact copy, but very similar. The Watchers are an ancient species with many names: changelings, winged ones, fairies. They study people to impersonate them, and they will never let them leave. Knocks and the voices of the cabin's inhabitants are heard outside. Then Daniel finds a hatch in the floor, which they didn't even know existed. Descending, they discover a well-fortified and equipped living space filled with food and equipment. Mina turns on an old computer, and a video recording shows the face of the professor, whose real name was Rory Kilmartin. He was the first to study the Watchers and tried to learn about their origins. In 1979, the scientist found this place, which he called Wonderland. Every evening, the Watchers came to his window and studied him. For many years before this, the professor's colleagues laughed at him, not believing his tales. Then he built this bunker, using the labor of men from nearby remote villages. He chose the lonely or those with bad habits so that their disappearance would not attract much attention, as every evening he convinced them to have dinner outdoors. Hiding inside, he watched the Watchers deal with them. Thus this bunker was built on blood. One day, a Watcher appeared before him in the form of a girl with red hair. She was very different from the others, as if she were unique and looked curious and harmless. That's when he realized that if he unlocked the secrets of the fairies, he might even conquer death. He did the impossible, lured this girl into a cage and began experiments on communication, trying to befriend her. She changed form, sometimes turning into a frightening creature with long arms, but seemed to listen to him. Gradually, she became close and understandable to him, but now the professor realized he had achieved nothing significant and was ready to end his life. He hid a boat by the river, and this is the only way out. Just follow the birds. He asked the survivor to go to his university office and destroy all the documents found there, and now he will go to her and stay here forever. In the last recording, they see Kilmartin climbing up. Gunshots are heard, and then all is quiet. Realizing that this is their last night in the forest, Sierra turns on the music and invites Daniel to dance, but he seems upset about leaving. He says his family is dysfunctional and he has nowhere to return to. Then the girl offers to let him stay with her for a while until they find him a good occupation and place to live, as they have become good friends. In the morning, the group sets out to escape, guided by the signs and Mina's parrot, whom she asked to lead them. Soon they reach a massive stone disc in the ground, covering the entrance to a huge tunnel. Madeline explains that this is where the last representatives of the ancient fairy race were locked up, who were once very friendly with humans. After many centuries, they managed to surface, but now the friendship has turned into hatred. They stay here because they are held by magic, so they need to run far away. They walk all day. Dusk falls, but there is no river or boat in sight. It starts raining, and they fall into despair when they see huge flocks of birds flying in one direction. They run after them and reach the river. The women rush to the boat when Daniel hears screams behind him and sees John. He returns for him, rejoicing that the man survived, but it turns out to be a changeling. The women scream, begging Daniel to run, but he doesn't hear and dies at the hands of the Watcher, who then takes on his form while Madeline, Mina, and Sierra sail down the river. The women wake up in the boat and see that they have returned to civilization. They stop a bus and ride to the city, listening to music and only now realizing that it's over. Later, Mina goes to the university where Kilmartin worked, posing as his niece to enter his office and fulfill his last request. There, she finds more documents, photos, and a recording in which he discusses the fairies and the fact that there are still half-blood children in the world. Mina finds a stack of photos and, looking at them, seems very surprised. In the evening, Mina goes to Sayara's house, showing a photo of Madeline from the professor's belongings, explaining that it is his wife who died several years ago. So the Madeline they lived with in the cabin was a special fairy capable of moving during the day. It was she whom Kilmartin caught. He couldn't kill her, and she took on Madeline's form to return to civilization. Then a car pulls up to the house, and the real Ciara gets out, while the one she's talking to is actually a fairy. Realizing she has been exposed, the fairy knocks Mina out and changes shape again, turning into Daniel. They just want to live like other species, but due to human hatred, they are forced to stay underground. The fairy turns into Kilmartin and goes to Mina. In the house, the fairy transforms into her and prepares to kill the girl. But Mina says that there are others like her somewhere because she is half human and acknowledges that it was unfair of humans to banish the fairies from their world. The fairy softens and spreads her wings, admitting that Mina might be right, and she flies away. Mina revives Ciara. Later, she reunites with her twin sister Lucy, finally forgiving herself for their mother's death. She tells her about her experience, admitting that she still sees Madeline appearing in the forms of other people. Her nieces arrive to show Mina a drawing of her and Darwin, whom she still keeps as a pet. Meanwhile, outside, a girl with red hair appears, looking at their apartment windows and taking on the form of a girl with a strange face. This is probably not a horror movie, but rather a scary bedtime story when a child doesn't want to sleep and asks for something frightening. Everything builds up slowly and tastefully, but the ending unfolds somewhat mundanely, although mysteriously. It all begins in a desert, where a lone child stumbles along, gnawing on a human finger, searching for his mother. A few miles away, a car drives down a road that abruptly ends in the middle of the desert. The man driving the car steps out and continues on foot. Wyndham is a photographer who came here to capture the solar eclipse. After taking a few photos and noticing that the day is coming to an end, he tries to return to his car but unexpectedly encounters a boy who seems lost and frightened. Wyndham is ready to help, but the boy doesn't seem to want it. He points in the direction where he lost his parents and walks away. Trying to help the boy find his way home, Wyndham follows him, but the boy rudely refuses his support and leaves. The man is left alone in the darkness, with no way to return to civilization. Wyndham lies down to sleep on the ground, but struggles to do so, reliving the day's events in his mind. Suddenly, he hears strange sounds. He follows the noise and soon finds stakes with ropes strung between them, from which hang bottles that produce a melodious chime in the desert. Before him is a large canyon, at the bottom of which stands a wooden house, around which a woman is wandering, singing a song. Wyndham asks for help, but she enters the house, as if not hearing his pleas. He finds an iron ladder leading down and begins to descend. However, the ladder only reaches halfway down the canyon, and from there, it's just an ordinary rope ladder. Wyndham overcomes both and approaches the house. He knocks persistently at the door, but receives no answer. So, Wyndham opens the door himself and enters. The woman, standing at the stove, greets him calmly, as if she had been expecting his arrival. She offers him dinner, and although he refuses, she serves him some soup and places it before him on the table. Wyndham is grateful for her hospitality, but continues to ask questions about how to leave this strange place. He tells her about the boy he met and asks for water. The woman, named Alina, suggests that he rest until morning, and Wyndham gratefully accepts her care. He lies down in the bed she points out, observing as Alina tidies herself and notes that she is young and beautiful. The next morning, he gathers his things and heads outside, hoping to find a way home. But strangely, he cannot find the rope ladder he descended the previous day. Without it, reaching the iron section is impossible. Wyndham returns to the house and, taking out his camera, takes pictures of the surroundings and the drawings on the canyon walls. Everything is quite gloomy and reminds him of death in all its forms. He then notices Alina, who is busy repairing the roof, and asks her about the missing ladder, but she either does not understand what he is talking about or pretends not to. Although her words imply that there are other residents here, she does not tell him anything directly. Disappointed, Wyndham walks around the canyon, periodically calling for help, but to no avail. Later, Alina asks him to undress so she can wash his clothes, saying it wouldn't be proper to return home so dirty. The man has no choice but to comply. That night, he struggles to sleep again, goes outside, and once again tries to find a way out, but there is none. In the morning, he searches the house and, finding a hammer, tries to climb the canyon wall. Suddenly, he notices a movement above, and then a chicken carcass falls down, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Wyndham regains consciousness in the darkness. His leg is injured by his own hammer, and he cries out in pain. Alina rushes to help him, but she does not answer his questions about the children he saw on the cliff. For several days, he drifts in and out of fever, unable to distinguish between night and day, unsure if he is truly seeing children around him. But the day of recovery comes. Limping, Wyndham makes his way outside. He demands that Alina tell the children above to pull him out of there, but she pretends not to understand him. She offers him to stay, promising to take care of him and ensure his well-being. But Wyndham doesn't need this. He wants to return home, to his work. He rudely pushes Alina away, rejecting any help. The man examines his leg and realizes that it will be a long time before he can use it fully. Suddenly, he hears voices from above and looks up to see the boy holding a little girl by the hand. The pair cheerfully ask how they can help, and upon learning that Wyndham wants to climb up, the boy promises to bring ropes and pull him out with his winch. But before leaving, he asks a rather strange question about Wyndham's favorite color. Wyndham replies that it's red and begs them to hurry. The boy and girl leave, and Wyndham checks his wallet in his pocket, not intending to return for his other belongings. Suddenly, a rope falls from above, and the same boy advises him to tie himself tightly, which Wyndham does. They begin to pull him up, and the man is already anticipating his rescue, but about halfway up, the rope stops. Dangling over the canyon, Wyndham screams, then tries to climb the rope himself, but lacks the strength and ends up hanging helplessly under the merciless sun. He regains consciousness from moisture, but when he looks up, he sees the boy spraying him with a hose, mocking the helpless man. Several other children appear on the cliff, ranging from very young to older teens. They are all dressed in clothes obviously taken from other people and behave inappropriately. Taunting Wyndham, they start swinging the rope, causing him to crash into the canyon walls, instinctively calling out for help from Alina. He sees the woman shouting angrily at the foolish children and loses consciousness after another blow to the wall. That night, he wakes up in bed and immediately tries to get up. Alina doesn't understand where he is headed, but Wyndham is willing to do anything to escape. The woman explains that the children are homeless, gathered in the desert together, surviving as best they can. Neither of them notices that while they talk, the children stand on the cliff, watching the house's windows burn. The next day, Wyndham watches as Alina releases a bird, envying its ability to fly. The woman brings him a spare set of clothes from somewhere, and although he didn't ask for them, he is touched by her care. Time passes. One day, Wyndham plants a small garden at the bottom of the canyon. Occasionally, the children bring them various items, food and drinks, which surprises Wyndham since there are no stores around. He doesn't understand their behavior. First, they feed him, then they mock him, but Alina accepts it all as normal. The man becomes more involved in the household, marveling at Alina's quiet demeanor. One night, he tries to ask her questions, which are interrupted by cries from the yard. Alina advises Wyndham not to go outside when the children behave like that, but he rushes out into the night and sees the boys, dressed in outlandish clothes, gathered around the house. They start taunting him, pushing and beating him, but suddenly disappear into the night. Wyndham demands answers from Alina. Who are these children? Why do they live here? And why does she stay in this horrible place? But the woman remains calm, not admitting that she is a prisoner. That evening, she comes to Wyndham. The man, starved for female attention, eagerly welcomes her. Time passes, and the first sprouts appear in Wyndham's garden. One day, the boy in the cap calls to him from above. He is friendly and promises to bring some soda. Wyndham returns to his plants and unexpectedly finds a wedding ring and car keys buried in the sand. That evening, Alina shows him a portrait of a woman. Calling her the first mother, she confesses that she is expecting his child. Stunned, Wyndham can't believe his ears. He never wanted to have children here, especially with a woman he barely knows. He yells at Alina, but he has no choice but to accept it. The next morning, he finds his garden destroyed by local birds, but Alina willingly helps him replant, which earns his gratitude. Gradually, life in the house falls into some semblance of order. Alina runs the household, and Wyndham exercises, working on his leg. One day, the boy in the cap visits again. He is very curious and asks Wyndham many questions. Wyndham asks him to help Alina as she is going to have a child and they will need a doctor. The man asks the boy to bring some rope and something heavy to use as a counterweight. He plans to climb out and take them to the city, where he can take care of the woman and the boy. The boy promises to do everything when everyone is asleep or gone, but then one of the older boys appears and takes him away. Later, Wyndham tells Alina that the boy wants to study, that he is smart, different from the others, and wants to live differently. The man wants to help him, and help her too, but Alina reacts strangely. She tries to find out exactly what Wyndham is missing here. When he mentions freedom, Alina is puzzled. After all, no one forbids him from doing anything here. Isn't that freedom? Then the man tells her about the outside world, remembering the ocean and a cheeseburger. Alina doesn't know what that is, so Wyndham explains what the dish consists of. The woman admits that her mother used to say that mirages live outside. But here, in the desert, everything is real. Wyndham takes out his camera and shows her the photos he took on the day he ended up here. But what impresses the woman is not the solar eclipse, but a random shot in the car with music playing in the background. At night, he has nightmares about the terrifying faces of the children mocking someone. In the morning, he hears Alina's terrible scream from the yard, and rushing outside, he sees the boy in the cap crucified over the canyon on wires. The savages stand on the cliff, laughing. The woman suddenly declares that brothers wouldn't do such a thing. She accuses Wyndham of killing her son and strikes him on the head with a board. When he comes to, Wyndham finds himself in a cage. Despite his pleas and begging, Alina has no intention of letting him go. She feeds him like an animal, and her children come to watch his suffering. One day, he sees a girl standing on the cliff. She is clearly not from here. Wyndham catches her attention, though he is terrified to shout, fearing to wake Alina. Whispering, he begs the girl to call for help. She understands him, promises to do everything necessary, and leaves, assuring him she will return soon. Wyndham waits in hiding, watching the heavily pregnant Alina as she goes about her chores. Suddenly, he hears screams and sees the savages catching the girl. They drag her to the cliff and dramatically kill her before his eyes. Time passes. Wyndham remains in the cage. He involuntarily witnesses unnatural rituals performed by Alina, her children, and her brothers. One day, he suddenly tells Alina that he wants to stay here forever, to raise his child and love Alina, who will become his queen. He will teach the child everything he knows and is ready to give himself completely. And this is his choice. But hearing the word choice, the woman laughs. He never had one. He is just a seed blown here by the wind. And this child is only hers. The man will stay in the cage until the baby is born. After that, nothing in the desert goes to waste. Finally, the day of birth arrives. Alina screams in the house as Wyndham paces in the cage. The woman reaches him, begging for help, as she has never had such a difficult birth before. She releases the man from the cage, and he does his best to ease her pain. The children stand on the cliff, watching what is happening. Suddenly, Wyndham sees a ladder descending from above, but Alina cries out, and he stays by her side. The child is born at the moment of the solar eclipse. Wyndham takes the baby girl in his arms and kisses her, overjoyed to be a father. Alina begs him to give the baby to her, and when she receives the child, she promises to feed and protect her until she becomes the new mother. Then she will fulfill her purpose, just as Wyndham has fulfilled his now. At that moment, the boy sneaks up and slits the man's throat, exulting over the collapsing body, assuring him that he is doing it for the mother. Later, Alina gathers Wyndham's belongings and packs them in a chest, then goes to the baby, promising her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Wyndham's body decomposes in the yard of the house, sprouting grass and turning to dust. This is where this unusual film ends. Hey guys, today I will tell you about the second season of the fantasy drama from 2020, Warrior Nuns, based on the series of comics of the same name by artist and writer Ben Dunn.
Is this our thing now?
While swimming in the pool, Ava recalls what has happened to her since she went from being a paralyzed simpleton to a warrior nun wielding a mystical halo. The girl's musings are interrupted by a phone signal reminding her of your duty. Once a member of the Order of the Cruciform Sword, she's now in a hurry for her regular job at the cafe. Arriving for her shift, Ava listens to customers talk about the explosion at the Vatican and rumors that it was Angel Adriel himself who broke out of the basement, proclaiming himself a mission. Miguel intervenes in the company's conversation, mocking the legends about angels and miraculous cure of the infected, calling Adriel an imposter. Left alone with Ava, Miguel tries to get her opinion, but the girl says she doesn't think about the subject at all, fearing that she might expose herself. A colleague asks Ava to go upstairs to her boss's office, and Beatrice also asks her friend to talk less to visitors about legends so as not to draw suspicion to herself. On her way home in the evening, Ava can get away from the prophet fanatics handing out religious leaflets. One of them annoys the girl so much that she uses her power and pushes him aside. Meanwhile, in the monastery in Spain, having finished watching videos on social media with her friends, Camilla goes down to see Mother Superior. The woman instructs the girl to go to London. According to the order, one of the ministers is possessed by a demonic ghost. The girl agrees without any complaints, but Mother Superior sees that something is bothering her. Camilla confesses that there's no way she can come to terms with Mary's disappearance. Portugal. Drunken Father Vincent always walks looking over his shoulder, and it turns out that that's for a good reason. Out of nowhere, he is attacked by Lilith, and the old man can only save his life by telling her that Mary is alive. The Bishop of the Vatican agrees to an audience with nun Yasmin Monet. The girl says that she's preparing an article about the lost Christian artifacts, but she immediately directs the conversation to rumors about Adriel and the attack on the Vatican. This changes the bishop's mood, but the nun keeps pushing, claiming that she has learned about a certain female order in the course of her investigation. To avoid spilling the beans, the priest ends the meeting, but Yasmin isn't upset. She has managed to hack into the network. Jillian sits by the archway, which has finally begun to come to life, but the field still hasn't stabilized and the girl can't get through the portal. Any attempt to use the portal ends up leaving burn marks on her hands. Christian is thrilled by her colleague's discoveries, but he guesses that she's only driven by a desire to find her son Michael, who has disappeared into another world. Christian asks Jillian to sign the renovation documents for the building he bought for the company, Arctech. After looking at the documents, the woman begins to doubt their contents, but deciding not to offend her friend with mistrust, she signs them. Ava continues her training by running over water, but at one point her strength leaves her and she falls. The girl admits to Beatrice that she's tired of sitting around while Adriel gains strength. However, her older friend reminds her that they have an uphill battle ahead of them. Christian arrives at the Vatican and declares that Jillian has given him full control of Arctech. He wants to merge the company with the church on condition that the bishop accepts the appearance of a new prophet, Adriel. The bishop realizes that the impostor has fooled yet another fanatic. Miguel comes back to the bar and confesses to the girl that he volunteers in the community of Samaritans fighting Adriel and they need the people like Ava. Mother Superior Susanna calls the bishop and asks the Vatican to intervene. Adriel is gaining strength and he has managed to fool hundreds of Catholics already. The priest believes that it is too early to sound the alarm. First, he should make a statement that Adriel is an impostor, and if that doesn't work, call on the Order of the Cruciform Sword for help. This conversation is overheard by Yasmin. She has just received a confirmation of her hunch. Vincent arrives at his residence and escorts Lilith inside, telling the guards that she's his friend. Ava convinces Beatrice to have some fun and have a couple of shots. The girls are having carefree fun. Meanwhile, at the Italian convent on her way to dinner, Mother Superior sees a gruesome picture. The bodies of the nuns in crimson puddles lie in the parish yard. At night, the nuns return home from the bar, and Ava notices Miguel, who is acting strangely. She decides to follow him and witnesses the guy getting beaten up by a crowd of fanatic hooligans. Ava helps her friend, and they are joined by Beatrice, who didn't really like the suspicious guy before. The young people tell her about the Samaritans, and the nun decides to accept Miguel's help in their fight against Adriel. Meanwhile, Mother Superior tries to warn the other monasteries where members of the order are based. However, the light bulbs on the map go out one by one, which means the warrior nuns are either destroyed or they leave their outposts. The company decides to sneak into the headquarters of Adriel followers, the firstborn sons. But seeing that the members of the sect are leaving with some cargo, the friends decide to follow them. Mother Superior orders Camilla to pack their things so they can hide and lay low as soon as possible. But suddenly the nuns notice that the light on the map has not gone out on the Madrid cell, which means there are still living members of the order out there. Father Vincent leads Lilith into the prison, promising that Mary is sitting in one of the cells. But as soon as the witch comes in sight, the priest locks the door behind her. On the other side, dozens of warriors come out at the girl, but Lilith easily dispatches them. The company watches as fanatics stack a prayer circle with a cross in the field and begin to pray. At this point, Ava's attention is attracted by a strange sound, and turning around, the girl sees a cloud of locusts rushing at them. On their way back, the friends try to explain what they have seen, and seeing how the girls are calm about everything, Miguel suspects something is wrong. Ava has to confess that they are the nuns of the order, but he takes it as a joke. Left alone, the girls decide that everything that is happening is a biblical execution reproduced by Adriel. Mother Superior and Camilla fly to Madrid and look for the headquarters of the order, which is housed in a flower store. From the scattered flowers, it is clear that something terrible has happened here as well. Yasmin confesses that she summoned Mother Superior to show her the bodies of the dead sisters. The nuns try to find out how Yasmin knew about them, but she says she can only reveal the truth to the warrior nun. Miguel comes to Ava's work and invites her to interrogate one of the firstborns they took. To sneak away, the girl cuts her arm, but the wound immediately disappears, much to Miguel's surprise. Beatrice asks her friend to stay out of it. The Samaritans have illegally kidnapped a man, and they shouldn't get involved. But Ava stubbornly does her own thing. Yasmin suggested the nuns take up residence in her room, but not wanting to risk it, the women choose their own hiding place and put the stranger to sleep so that she won't see the path they take to get there. Meanwhile, Lilith escapes from the prison and arrives at her mother's house. Miguel brings his new friends to the Samaritan headquarters, and when the boys begin interrogating the prisoner, Ava sees the devil in him. Father Vincent arrives at the main square, and seconds later, locusts appear there. The townspeople become scared. Suddenly, Adriel appears and saves the terrified people, thus earning a new addition to the army of fans. Even the priests from the Vatican begin to believe in Adriel's power. The bishop speaks with his subordinates, demanding that the impostor not be glorified. The mother rebukes Lilith for losing the battle for the halo and for failing to live up to her hopes by losing her place in the Order of the Cruciform Sword. Yasmin comes to her senses and tells the nuns that she grew up in a family that helps the order, and now the girl must find the owner of the halo, Ava, and give her her secret. Looking at Ava, the prisoner recognizes her as the owner of the halo and demands that she return it to its true owner, Adriel. Beatrice knocks the chatty kid out, but he breaks the ropes and frees himself. The demon proves to be very strong, and the warrior nuns cannot defeat him until Ava activates her halo and banishes the entity out of the boy. Beatrice hurries to get her friend out of the way to avoid any more questions. Adriel shows up at the bishop's office and offers to join forces, admitting that the boy is indeed the son of God. But just as the priest refuses and asks the madman to leave, Adriel displays a couple of tricks demonstrating his power. The prophet leaves, but his offer still stands. Lilith comes to Dr. Gillian for help and asks her to examine the scales that have appeared on her shoulder. While sitting in Dr. Gillian's office, the nun sees an emergency call from the Sisters of the Order, but she refuses to go to Madrid. While packing to escape again, Ava and Beatrice quarrel, but they are interrupted by a signal on her older friend's chest. She tells a student that they have been summoned to Madrid. The second message arrives with news from Lilith that the order has lost Mary. Vincent shows Adriel the signal and instructs the old man to join the women. Despite the gravity of the situation, Ava is excited about her trip to Madrid. Finally, the girls find the flower store where Mother Superior has left a movie ticket for them. The nuns have to scramble to avoid falling into the hands of the hunters. On the street, the girls spot a tail and have to get rid of it, but in an alleyway they are awaited by Vincent, who puts Beatrice to sleep. The priest tries to convince Ava that Adriel is the true prophet and she should go with him to return the prophet's halo, but the girl takes to flight and manages to defeat the old man. The girls make it to the movie theater where they finally meet Camilla. The nun takes her friends to the hiding place, the cellar beneath the cinema, where old Mother Superior is already waiting for them. The old woman gets straight to the point. She tells the sisters about the attack on the order and says that the time has come to do her duty. Yasmin comes out to the girls, and when Ava is beside her, the girl's pendant glows blue and she recognizes the warrior nun. Now Yasmin can reveal the secret of how to defeat Adriel. Gillian offers Lilith to cure the problem with a pass through the archway, but the girl realizes that the doctor needs it in order for her to find his son there. Yasmin tells the girls about the crown of thorns that can defeat the impostor. Meanwhile, traitors begin to appear in the Vatican, among those close to the bishop. As Yasmin continues talking about the crown, she reveals a secret. The thorny garment is not only a means of torture, it also disempowers the likes of Adriel. The only problem is that the wreath was stolen years ago and is now stored in a museum, but Ava doesn't see this as an obstacle and the girls go out on a tour. Disabling the cameras and distracting the guards, the nuns head for the exhibit. However, the only way to know that it's the right wreath is for Eva to touch it. Lilith makes up her mind, and wearing a special suit she enters the archway, but a second later she is thrown back. She's shocked because she felt that she had been on the other side of the portal for almost 2 hours and she was clearly not welcome there. The bishop goes down to the prison to visit the traitor and learn from him how Adriel creates the punishments of heaven. To make the prisoner more talkative, the priest tries medieval torture methods on him. At first, the impostor's henchman tolerates the pain, assuring him that Adriel is the real Son of God and all miracles are real. However, when the torture becomes unbearable, he admits that the prophet is collaborating with Arctech and the company uses its technology to create illusions. Lilith tries to understand why someone threw her out, and Jillian promises to deal with it next time. But the girl has no intention of entering the archway again, and she makes that clear to the doctor. After the conversation, Lilith disappears, forgetting the cross in the office. At night, the girls return to the museum to retrieve the crown. Mother Superior eliminates the guard, and the group of nuns sneaks in, sending old camera footage to the security monitors and disabling the laser alarms. Using the halo, Ava takes the crown, but nothing happens to it, and her friends ask Yasmin to help. Jillian decodes the tape from Lilith's camera, and as she speeds up, she sees someone's face on it. While the nuns are searching for the real wreath, Camilla notices that there is someone else in the museum beside them. Ava finally finds the artifact, but at that moment Camilla sees Adriel, and Vincent appears in front of the warriors and puts the crown on the girl's head, thereby depriving her of her superpowers and taking her with him. While Vincent is carrying Ava, the girl has terrible visions. She finally regains consciousness. Before leaving the exhausted girl in a dark alleyway, Vincent promises to pray for her before Adriel destroys her. But suddenly, Miguel comes to the girl's aid. By some miracle, he also happens to have superpowers. He says that explanations can wait, and having dealt with the priest, Miguel and Ava run away. Lilith comes to Adriel and, showing him her crusted hands, asks for his help. The nuns load Vincent into a car and drive off in search of Eva, shaking the cops on the way. The young people are finally safe, and Miguel returns Ava's crown and admits that he was sent from the other side of the arch to protect her. As they talk, a crowd of primitives in gas masks passes them, and Ava guesses that a new punishment awaits the city. In the meantime, the nuns get stuck on the road because of a flat tire. Miguel leads Ava to the gates of a cemetery, assuring her that he knows a way to destroy Adriel. All the while, the girl keeps seeing terrible visions, but she tries not to pay attention to them. After stealing a food delivery car, the nuns drive on, and Camilla recalls that the entire company has been hungry for a long time. After rummaging through the shelves, the girl finds something they can refresh themselves with, unusually shaped cakes that go down well with the sisters. Jillian arrives at the building she recently bought, and in the center the doctor sees a ritual cross and sectarians. Christian is also among them. Jillian asks Christian to explain what he has been doing all this time with her company and the building. Instead, Christian begins to talk about the all-powerful Adriel who will soon conquer the whole world. Beatrice arrives at the cemetery looking for her friend. But the gas Adriel sprays as part of the next execution makes her scared. The girl removes a gas mask from one of the firstborns. Miguel and Ava daringly walk into Adriel's sect's church, and the two witness a ritual in which a demon possesses a teenager. Ava wonders how to stop all of this, but Miguel asks her to protect the crown and steps forward to take the hit. The guy's plan works. He lets himself be possessed by the demon, and then by painting in blue, he banishes it to show the sectarians what's really going on in the church. Mother Superior leads Vincent out of the car and into the woods to finish him off. But the woman doesn't have the strength to shoot him, so she simply pushes him into a ravine and inflicts some mutilation. Beatrice arrives at the church just as the commotion begins. Some trying to escape and some trying to expel Miguel, thinking that he's the one who brought the devil. The three of them are trapped, and hugging her friends, Ava activates the halo. Adriel tells Lilith that their destinies are intertwined, and they will conquer the world together. Feeling important for the first time, the girl believes the imposter. Miguel, Ava, and Beatrice manage to escape from the church, but now they risk being caught by the police or other fanatics, so the guy offers a safe haven, his house. Adriel tells Lilith about Ariella, the girl he loved and to whom he gave his halo. The prophet dreamed that together they would create a religion based on truth. Mother Superior also tells the nuns this story. When the angel first came to Earth 1,000 years ago, he created an underground upside-down church. But Ariella prayed for a long time to find the truth, and God answered the girl. He sent her a crown that was to stop the impostor. Adriel and Mother Superior simultaneously tell this story, but each does it differently. The nun thinks that Ariella saw evil in the prophet, while Adriel tells Lilith that the crown corrupted the beloved and she betrayed him. Ariella put the crown on the prophet's head, and he was imprisoned in a cave in which he spent 1,000 years, except that the girl paid for it with her own life. And Mother Superior warns Ava that no one has ever managed to defeat Adriel and survive. The company arrives at Jillian's house, from which Lilith's signal was last heard, but the doctor asks the guests to leave. Miguel then asks to tell the woman that her son is here. Seeing the boy, who is much older than the day they last met, Jillian falls on his neck and cannot hold back her tears. The nuns try to find out from the doctor where Lilith has gone to, but Jillian cannot answer the question. The only thing the doctor can tell is that the girl's physical and mental health has severely deteriorated. Mother Superior goes outside to talk on the phone. The bishop asks the abbess to come to a secret meeting where further struggles with Adriel will be decided. Miguel, who is really Michael, comes into his childhood room and looks at the drawings he drew when Adriel manipulated him. Camilla hears someone's voice again and is caught in a frightened state by Beatrice. Camilla confesses that after being stroked on the back by one of the sisters in the convent, the girl is suffering from severe headaches and her friend suggests that she have a little examination. Jillian recalls the day Michael ran into the portal. Once on the other side, the boy wandered alone for a long time, and then the shining angels took him to Rhea, the lord of Adriel. It was she who trained the angel and then sent him to Earth to stop the evil. The abbess and Yasmin arrive at the meeting with the priests, where everyone is already gathered. The archbishop begins talking about Adriel, calling him a wolf in sheep's clothing. The charlatan himself, meanwhile, continues to tell Lilith about himself, complaining about his life in the dungeon. Angel offers to show his friend his difficult fate, and to do so he places burning fingers over her eyes. Jillian shows her son the face that ended up on her tape, and from what he sees, the boy faints. Beatrice does a scan of Camilla's spine, and during the procedure the girls are being frank with each other. One of the nuns confesses that she has doubts about Adriel, but if he really turns out to be the prophet, all the scriptures will lose their significance. The picture shows a cross inserted into Camilla's spine, which is what is causing the hallucinations. Unfortunately, Beatrice cannot remove it. Adriel asks Lilith forgiveness for the pain, but he convinces her to open her eyes, and when the burns come off, the girl sees demons and a completely different world, which she calls the truth. Beatrice finds Ava in the courtyard as she's practicing putting a wreath on the monument's head, but the halo goes off again and the girl falls. The nun tries to support a friend and assures her that they will defeat Adriel no matter what it takes. Christian meets Vincent in Arctac and reminds him that in just 2 days they will give the world to their master. A discussion breaks out at the meeting of priests. There are those who doubt Adriel's con game and believe that one cannot punish an angel without understanding his true purpose. At this, Bishop Francesco reveals to his colleagues the secret of Arctac, urging them to understand that all the punishments sent were nothing more than a trick. Mother Superior intervenes in the dispute, telling of the destruction of the members of the order. Apparently, the bishop and abbess have succeeded in convincing the crowd, but suddenly it transpires that half of those assembled are traitors, having defected to Adriel's side. A massacre of fanatics begins in the hall, and Mother Superior succeeds in removing only Francesco and Yasmin. The trio hides in the hotel gymnasium, but they can no longer get out, and Mother Superior calls Camille for help. Ava, Beatrice and Michael arrive at the inn, but the firstborns prove to be too many and the trio fears they cannot win. After examining the photograph of the cross in the spine and noticing a note from Beatrice, Jillian looks at Camilla through the glasses while she prays and sees the same waves that create the portal. The doctor guesses that Adriel is using the power of prayer to gain strength. Having heard the call, surviving nuns of the order arrive at Jillian's house. Ava takes the crowd of firstborns away, and Beatrice and Michael deal with the remaining two. The abbess commands her subjects to leave, but the bishop refuses, determined to expose Adriel to the full. Running from her pursuers, Ava runs through a wall and finds herself outside at a great height. The girl's halo shuts down again and she falls. Beatrice mourns her friend, but she opens her eyes and the artifact begins to glow again. Bishop surrenders to the traitors, hoping they will lead him to Adriel. The imposter angel himself, meanwhile, tells Lilith how much they will accomplish together after they cleanse the world with pain. The master's trust inspires the girl so much that she grows wings. And that concludes episode 5. Come back tomorrow for the next episode. Guys, if you don't want to miss anything, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.